Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to yet another edition, a very significant addition to my One Piece journey. Today we're going to be talking about the Whole Cake Island arc. This one isn't quite as long as Dressrosa, it isn't 100 chapters, but it is 77, I believe, and so this is going to be a doozy. This is going to be one of the longer videos on the channel, I imagine. So yeah, strap in. As per usual with these longer arcs, there may be some sections that I skim over a little bit, but rest assured that I will talk about everything I want to talk about and nothing will be left out. That's what these reviews are for. Now, because of a weird sort of recording schedule over the last couple of weeks, I've actually finished the next video, the Reverie video, so it's gonna be kind of weird. I feel like there's gonna be a bit of a wait for this one, but then once it comes out, the next one will be out in quick succession, so if you want to watch that right now, you can, through early access on Patreon. The Reverie video, it's 6 chapters, but they were super substantial, amazing chapters, and I talked about it for an hour and a half. So if you're interested in that, after this video, you can become a patron to get early access to that video review. And as we get closer and closer to that beautiful, beautiful number we'll get to where we catch up, you can join me on Twitch as I read through every single chapter live. Most Fridays, most Sundays, at least once a week, oftentimes two. So you can join in the journey. It's not too late to get in right before the end being when I catch up, because we're still going to be streaming the current chapters and such. But yeah, you can join me on Twitch, you can follow me on Twitch, link in the pinned comment and description. You can also join the Discord if you want to join the community and talk about One Piece and all that good stuff. It's a great community. But all that aside, before we talk about this magnificent arc, I don't think I gave any first impressions about my thoughts on it, but it is a phenomenal arc with amazing characters, a great aesthetic. It may have, let's just say my Mount Rushmore, my top 4 One Piece arcs have become a fivesome. But before we delve into that, let's talk about some AJPiece comments from the Dressrosa video. Not much to comment about this one, but a lovely little touch that I find really cool. Tyreek Smith says, "Not sure if this is something noteworthy, but you referred multiple times to verticality in Doflamingo's character. This brought me back to Marineford and how Doflamingo's first major action was to take out the largest, most physically imposing figure on the battlefield, Little Oars Jr. Perhaps this also encompasses what you brought up about his character." Beautiful little touch from Marineford that I didn't really think of that you brought up here, so thanks for doing so. I don't have a ton to comment on with regards to it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's just another little cohesive touch that shows that Oda knew what he was doing with regards to writing this character, even from his introduction all the way, well, Marineford isn't his introduction, but even tons of chapters before Dressrosa, I feel like Oda knew exactly what he was going to do with him. And so seeing that cohesion here, through that little touch, I don't think that's a coincidence. Then TM says, "I think an interesting lens to view Fujitora through is that he's the first morally just Marine we get introduced to since Sabaody, where we learned that Marines' real goal was not just to enforce peace, or was not to enforce peace, but to enforce order and protect the interest of the Celestial Dragons regardless of how far the Celestial Dragons go against the ideals that the Marines espouse to. In the past before Sabaody, we used to think that there are good Marines and bad Marines. Ever since Sabaody, we realized that the Marines as an organization are meant to create loyal, unthinking soldiers, and sometimes someone who is morally just like Garp, Smoker, or Kobe end up working for them, whether it be through falling for their propaganda like Kobe initially did, or thinking that the symbol of the Marines is more important than the reality of the Marines like Garp does, which is a beautiful way of summing up Garp's character, or his character with regards to that topic at least. Fujitora is extremely interesting to view through that lens to me. We've been told him and another admiral have been recruited through a special draft to replace the 2 missing admirals after Marineford, with both Sengoku and Kuzan quitting. So Fujitora is a new recruit with the authority of an admiral, and he shows it by not playing the government's rules, or playing by the government's rules, and apologizing to King Riku. He seems to me like someone who is well aware of the evils of the Marines, and is willing to use them in ways that hurt his standing to improve the lives of civilians. Another thematic detail about Isho is that the epithet of Fujitora translates to purple tiger, which is true. I don't think I mentioned that in the video, but yeah, tiger, purple. And in Japanese myths, tigers are often enemies of dragons. Perhaps this represents that Isho the tiger views himself as an enemy to the celestial dragons, and is simply biding his time and doing all that he can in the meantime to manipulate the dragon's army into doing some good while he waits. So yeah, I totally agree with all of this, and it's very well put. the symbolism of Tora, tiger, being opposed to the dragons, celestial dragons, that was pointed out to me during some streams, and I think that's really, really super interesting and very timely considering my foray into the Yakuza series and my streams on that. But I digress. That's very symbolic, very cool. I don't imagine that that's a coincidence at all. And yeah, I love that Fujitora, if seen through that lens, is very similar in some ways to Garp. As you say, Garp very deeply understands the importance of the symbol of the Marines, and in a lot of ways has to sort of go against what his heart pleads for, because the reality of the situation is that he has a much more long-reaching impact than he would like in certain specific situations, while of course I think valuing the influence he has. But Fujitora is a nice play on that, because he absolutely understands the symbolism of what the Marines stand for and how gestures within the Marines have long-reaching consequences. And rather than Garp, who sometimes has to acquiesce to that, like he did in Marineford, Fujitora doesn't care. And in fact, Fujitora, I'm not going to say that goes the opposite direction, because at heart, their characters are very similar in the way they view the Marines. And the situation at Marineford was very different from the situation at Dressrosa. Who's to say if Garp would have done something different? But nonetheless, Fujitora uses the Marines as a symbol to his end, which is to abolish the warlord system, pull it up from the roots, and just start something anew. He's a great example of this sort of perspective of a Marine to sort of change things from the inside. And in that way, he's similar to Kobe. And then his sort of conflicts with the higher-ups, we've seen him with Akainu, are very reminiscent of Smoker. So he's actually very similar in lots of ways to Kobe, Smoker, and Garp, but has his own personality, his own psychology, his own goals, and his own way of doing things. And he's such a great addition to the complexion of the Marines, and such a great addition to the story, and I'm so glad that he's a character. I really hope to see him again soon. Maybe not soon, but eventually. Just a couple of references and bits of information here that I think are interesting. Tuvilo says, just a cute reference, Trafalgar and Waterloo are the two major battles Napoleon lost. Trafalgar D. Water Law. Very cool. I also love the Amber Lead backstory. It's not so subtly an analog to asbestos, and how the asbestos mining industry was kept up for decades after the government and those in power were already very aware of the hazards. I'm not going to lie to you guys by saying I'm super educated in that, but a quick Google search and, I mean, you can see the parallels. But again, it's very layman, so not super educated in it, but regardless, the parallels are very cool. I just love these little details that you guys can give to me about things that may have inspired Oda, or little things he's trying to say through plot events. Really cool. Next we have Rodin, who says, in a lot of ways, Dressrosa to me seemed like a post-Timeskips take on the Alabasta arc. Everything from Smoker and Fujitora having similar roles, to Luffy reuniting with his brothers, Cobra and Riku, etc. But my favorite connection has to be between the two warlords, Crocodile and Doflamingo. Both are people who caused a lot of suffering to a whole country and put the blame on their benevolent rulers, all the while getting to play the role of the hero. But more importantly, both of them are deeply insecure people who are using these countries as a tool for their personal fantasies. Crocodile dreamed of being the pirate king, but his ambitions were crushed and he didn't think himself to be strong enough in order to achieve that goal traditionally. So instead he pulled strings from the shadows and orchestrated a civil war in Alabasta with the end goal of gaining Pluton for itself and using its power to make up for the lack of his own. It's fitting, then, that his defeat had him shot up from the dark underground and up to the sky, where everyone could see him for who he truly was. Doflamingo, meanwhile, was so desperate to retake the sense of power and control that had been taken from him that he used Dressrosa as the playground where he could once again play make-believe God. He placed himself above everyone else, only to be punched from the skies back down to the level of the common man. Just as he was as a child, the very thing he feared the most. Maybe I'm reaching here, but I think One Piece is full of connections like this that hold it together, and make it as thematically consistent and strong as it is. It's a fantastic write-up, and it's one, once again, I totally agree with. I think I mentioned this in the Dressrosa video, that Dressrosa as an arc is kind of a celebration of everything One Piece. It has parallels and stylistic things that are reflections in lots of ways of past arcs. Alabasta's a big one. I think I mentioned Fishman Island and Skypiea. I might have mentioned Water 7 and East Lobby, I'm not sure. But nonetheless, a lot of the big arcs you can see reflected in Dressrosa. And Alabasta is a huge one structurally. I've always loved the NL Crocodile parallels, with the rain versus the sun, and the god being struck down, metaphorically, and the guy being shot up from the underground. But Doflamingo works in direct inverse parallel with Crocodile in this way as well, and it's really cool. I didn't even think of the brother stuff, but that's really cool as well. Them playing the role of the hero, that really hits deep, because I think they both tie back to very emotional cores of the character in differing ways. One is a very heartfelt, fervent wish from Sir Crocodile. Two is basically just a human being using whatever means he can, playing the hero in this case, using narratives because he's realized how flimsy they can be in order to make the world make sense once again, in order to put the world back together, because that's all he perceived the world to be, is what he knew, and that was taken from him. And so he's got to return to that. Anyways, great comparison, great comment. And speaking of Doflamingo and his psychology and how fascinating it is, we have this comment from the Brayden channel, who says, "Now you know why this Doflamingo character is commonly talked about as one of the best shonen antagonists of all time. But what I found to be the most impressive part about Doflamingo's backstory is how it shows how truly broken the world is, not just for the citizens, though they are the ones who face the brunt of it, but for the celestial dragons as well. Think of it like this: the celestial dragons don't really live, do they? They just survive in excess, but they don't make any decisions for themselves, and they don't accomplish anything themselves. They have no larger identity other than being a part of the world government's political symbol toolbox. So in a sense, not even the celestial dragons are even free. And so in Doflamingo's backstory, we see a celestial dragon try to become human, to gain freedom from the excess and godhood, and builds meaningful relationships with his fellow humans. But look what happens: he and his family are mercilessly tortured and killed for the crimes that they are not even responsible for. So all of that is to say, Doflamingo's backstory to me showcases the current state in the world benefits even fewer people than we thought, and that this world desperately is in need of fixing on multiple levels, bottom to top. Also, I want to say I've been a big fan of yours ever since middle school, and now being in college, getting to see you nearly finish up your One Piece journey, and being on that journey with you has been a joy to experience. Thank you and have a good rest of your day." That's amazing. Congratulations on being in college, and damn, I'm kind of old, eh? No, that's amazing. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for being a fan of the channel for so long, and thank you for your insight. Yeah, that's a great way of summing up why I think the celestial dragons, while evil through the acts that they commit, are more nuanced than I think you would assume, given their role in the story. You look at Charlos and you just go, oh, that's evil. And it is, but there's also that element of a lack of agency throughout the Celestial Dragon ranks. And so it really turns itself into a really interesting moral situation. It makes it a bit more nuanced, a bit more, I don't want to say gray, because in a lot of ways it's not. There are very black and white elements to the Celestial Dragons, and I think Oda portrays that really well. But in terms of their psychology and culpability, I do think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of them are just born into this. A lot of them are like Doflamingo and just grow up thinking, this is the world. It is my right to look down upon everyone, to cruelly treat everyone. That's how the world is. It is reinforced, it is conditioned, and so that's how they live life. And so yeah, I think, Reverie has Miosgard, who is an interesting look into this situation, and I hope we explore his character a bit more to maybe add a new dimension to this element of the Celestial Dragons, because I think he's the prime candidate for that, and maybe transcending those Celestial Dragon cages, those bonds, those chains. I think Miosgard is a really great example for this topic about why it is possible to move past that. And all it takes is compassion. Extremely strong kindness and compassion from a wonderful, vibrant person like Otohime, who is, it's not easy to come by that, but it is possible. There are people like that. And then we have one more comment from Pit Dark Angel. When it comes to Usopp running away as Robin was turned into a toy, you mention him forgetting some of his development at Eni's lobby. The other aspect of this is that it forces him into a situation where he has to develop further than the point that he was at. We've seen him risk his life for the sake of his closest friends, but at that point the only people there he knew about were the Tontatas, who were still mostly strangers to him. This situation gave him the push to also be able to stand up for and risk his life for people he isn't closely tied to. I love that element of Usopp's character. Usopp is one of the stars of Dressrosa, and I'm so glad to say that. And I do love that him in some way forgetting to an extent, or regressing to an extent due to the memory stuff with Robin. I do love that despite regressing, he actually takes steps forward. Like you say, him pushing himself to these limits for people he doesn't know is a big step forward for Usopp. A big part of his arc was being able to do that for people he knew and loved. Now doing this for people he doesn't know, he didn't really realize it, but inherently, he was taking steps further forward despite having regressed to a prior state, if you buy into that interpretation, which, like I said, I do. It's a really cool sort of bit of a complexity to Usopp's character arc. It's done in a really interesting way. It's done in a way that shows progression while also showing regression, which, you know, by and large is an encapsulation of Usopp as a character. He takes steps forward, he stumbles and takes steps back, but it's very continuous and organic and raw. That is an encapsulation of his arc so far, and just like he's been able to do this whole time, he learned to be brave, and he was able to succeed, and feel empowered by helping those who need his help. In this case, people who he didn't even know, hardly knew. So yeah, Usopp, he's taken a bit more of a backseat since the time skip, but he still remains one of the premier characters in this series. Those are all the AJPiece comments for today, and for this video, there were some fantastic ones that I had to leave out for time purposes, otherwise I'd be here all day, but I read all of them, and thank you so much for sharing. They were fantastic for the Dressrosa video. If you want a comment of yours to be read aloud during a video, just use the hashtag AJPiece and it'll be entered into the pool. I do believe that the comments for this video will be read during the Wano video, so that's really exciting. The first Wano video. Anyways, Whole Cake Island. This arc was amazing. I find it interesting to compare this stylistically with Dressrosa, because, you know, they're both quite long. They both cover different characters, with Luffy and a couple others being the commonality, but it's interesting for me to sort of compare the styles, because Dressrosa covers all sorts of stuff that, you know, the concept of memories and losing memories and all that, and bonds, and how that coalesces with Doflamingo, and the sort of nuances of his relationships and dynamics with Law and Corazon, and his broken psychology and the character study of that, and the idea of freedom, and how Doflamingo sort of combats the idea of freedom, and how he oppresses others to be free himself, but also cages himself in a very contradictory, paradoxical way, and all that stuff. My point is, Dressrosa covers all sorts of topics, and it has lots of breadth, and depth as well. Whole Cake Island covers fewer topics, is quite a bit tighter, and explores them to a great degree. So Whole Cake Island, while being very long, I think is fixated very deeply on the idea of family, the nuances of it, the positives and negatives of it, blood and a lack thereof, whether it's blood family or found family, all those sorts of nuances to do with family. I think Whole Cake Island is deeply involved with that, and I think that's a centerpiece thematically, and then around it are very interesting things to do with Big Mom and her fragmented psychology. She is one of the most interesting mentalities and psychologies in the entire story, full stop. What a fantastic backstory, what an interesting character, and her contrast with Luffy, oh, amazing. And then it uses Whole Cake Island, this sort of Disney-esque centerpiece, to show this dualism of tone. There is horrible, horrible subject matter, tons of death and blood and destruction and darkness, but it has the veneer of this colorful, magical world, this sort of Alice in Wonderland world. Reading this in color was such a treat, because it really nailed home this dualism, but it's very whimsical, it's very charming, it's very quirky, stylistically, just buried beneath the surface, not even beneath the surface, in plain view in some ways, we have a malevolence. And then another big theme, which I think is attached to Katakuri, who, holy shit, what a character. Katakuri, phenomenal. But attached to Katakuri is the idea of embracing who you are, of living free, and how that coalesces with Luffy, and how that coalesces to the idea of family. But it's very tight. It's very sort of monolithic in terms of the themes it covers, and a lot of things are surrounding that, but I think it's very, you know, focused. Whereas Dressrosa covers a bunch of stuff, and Neither is better inherently than the other. I just think it's interesting to compare stylistically. But yeah, Whole Cake Island is super cohesive. Katakuri, phenomenal character. We'll talk a ton about him. And let me just say right now, his fight with Luffy is my favorite in the series thus far. It is the best. It snuck up on me how good it was, but my god was it good. And the anime version of it, I watched it with some of my viewers and unbelievable. So Katakuri and Big Mom are stars, Pudding's a great character, Brulee's a great character, Luffy does a lot for sure. This elevates him, absolutely. And you may have understood this by how I talked about her last time round in my Zoe video, but I love Carrot as well. She is an absolute star. I adored her during Whole Cake Island. She just brings me so much joy. And emotions as well, because Pedro was great in this as well, and his death is one of the most sort of understated and shocking in One Piece. It just kind of comes at you from left field, even though it's kind of hinted at throughout the chapter or two leading up to it. It just kind of smacked me in the face, and I was kind of gobsmacked. But the details kind of bleed through right after it happens, and the significance and the weight and the way it leads into and sort of hints at stuff that happens later, that will, I assume, happen later on in Wano, and how that applies to Luffy and the Mink tribe and the Kozuki clan and all that. It's fantastically done. So Pedro's a star too, but I mean, this is the arc where Sanji, I think, truly bloomed for me. I mean, I've been upfront with the fact that I haven't really enjoyed Sanji a ton since the time skip. I didn't really enjoy him a ton prior to the time skip, like in Thriller Bark. I think that was a weak point for him. I think a lot of Fishman Island was a weak point for him. He has some cool stuff in Dressrosa, but overall I think he was maybe the weakest Straw Hat post-time skip, not because he doesn't have some good stuff, but because he had more negatives than anyone else. Just my opinion, of course. I know not everyone agrees, but that's just my take. But he has shot himself right up with this arc. His backstory is what I've been waiting for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chapters, and it is phenomenal. This stuff hit me so hard. I was bawling during these chapters. I couldn't believe how much I was moved by them. Sanji is a special character. He always has been, but this just elevated him even more. His family, his relationship with Pudding, and how he was able to help her see the beauty in herself, just as Luffy was able to help Katakuri embrace himself. His dynamic with Luffy and how he, in order to protect Zeph and the Baratie and the crew, had to leave them, despite it being so obvious that that isn't what he wanted to do. Just how selfless he is, how much he cares. It was beautiful stuff. This is truly Sanji's arc. I think if I had to pick one character, it would have to be Sanji and Katakuri. Let's do both of them. But you get what I mean. Sanji is an absolute star. And yeah, I was just delighted with how his character was approached. Anyways, that's sort of my overall thoughts on the arc. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. We start with chapter 825. I think I might have touched on 825 at the end of Dressrosa. Essentially, we're just shown the introduction to Sanji and how he's with Vito, and the introduction to the idea of Germa 66, his family's sort of military-esque force. All that stuff's introduced, and Luffy and the crew are not doing well after not being able to eat very well or not having a cook, and they eventually make their way towards Whole Cake Island. Or rather, they enter the territory of Whole Cake Island, first coming up and coming into contact with one of Germa 66's ships. So this ship from Germa 66 confronts the Straw Hats, and immediately we see, we're introduced to Yanji, we're introduced to Reiju, and we get a bit more details about the subtextual details about what Sanji's family's like, the sort of culture within it, and it's not very positive. But what is notable is that Reiju sucks some poison out of Luffy, and there's a bit of discord between her and Yanji, who says, "You're saving the enemy," and she doesn't seem to have any qualms about it. And I just want to emphasize that in this chapter, in this introductory chapter for Reiju and Yanji and sort of the dynamics here, Reiju does stand apart a little bit, and that will be important going forward. So the Germa ship kind of sees the Straw Hats and takes stock of them and what they're doing, and then they just go back. They go back to to their family, and they realize that confronting them properly wouldn't be really worth it. And then at the same time, we have one of Jinbei's men who conveys a message to Jinbei that Luffy has arrived. And that was obviously super exciting. Jinbei is a character I really enjoy, and seeing him come back into the story at this point was really gratifying. So from here, the Straw Hats make their way onto Cacao Island en route to Whole Cake Island. And this place, like everything in this zone, is made of dessert. There's tons of crew hijinks as they eat a building, eat a restaurant or a cafe sort of thing, and then are kind of bailed out by someone named Charlotte Pudding, who seems to be this really sweet girl who saved the Straw Hats and seems to have an air about her that she'll be important later. And I guess the main thing is she's shown to be very sweet. You know, the idea of deceptive sweetness, I associate with Pudding, at least early on. But then we get to this set piece that is wonderful, and part of the reason that I really think that Whole Cake Island in color is how it's meant to be viewed. This set piece of this song that Big Mom sings, this celebration of this tea party that will occur in 3 days, as we see this full view of all these happy creatures, trees and sunflowers and hills and the rainbow and the sun and the clouds, everyone singing with these happy faces, and it looks like this beautiful, idyllic Disney film, but the colors just feel a little too vibrant. It feels a little too unreal, and that is because it is too good to be true. Hidden just a tiny bit beneath the surface is the true intent of Big Mom and what really goes on Whole Cake Island, and it is insidious, but I love the duality of the presentation, like I was talking about before, being so beautiful and vibrant and Disney-like. I think a low-key element to this arc of Whole Cake Island is the idea of masks or fronts or perception and how it can be wrong. It's a case with Pudding. It's the case with Whole Cake Island as a whole. It's a case with Katakuri. It's a sort of mask that Sanji tries to put on later in his confrontation with Luffy, and it is brittle and so easy to see that it's false. But nonetheless, I do think that, now that I'm talking about it, the idea of masks and falsities is a big part of Whole Cake Island. So the Straw Hats continue to talk to Pudding. We learn that Pudding is actually Sanji's betrothed. Pudding and Sanji and Pudding's character is one of the highlights of Whole Cake Island. I think she's great. And, so yeah, her introduction like this is really interesting, and I didn't really catch on onto the hints that she was more than she seemed until a few chapters from now. But let's just say it was done really subtly with presentation. I'll get to that in a bit, but this is where we first learn about it. The crew are then told how to get to Whole Cake Island. They go back to the Thousand Sunny to see that Peckham's is gone and missing, and it says "turn back" scratched into the bathroom. And Luffy just encourages him to keep moving forward. In the meantime, we get more of an introduction to Sanji's other brothers, Ichiji and Niji, who, acting as this subset of Germa 66, end this 2-year war within a few hours. So the idea of how fearsome they are is emphasized here. And there's this wonderful, beautifully drawn but very destructive spread that we see of them overlooking the destruction that they've just wrought as they make their way back to see Sanji and the rest of the family. And I think the main thing to say about their personalities is that they seem, at least in points, sadistic about Sanji. They say they can't wait to see him again, but then the other one says liar. And basically, they're looking forward to enforcing what Sanji should do. But I think that yet another sort of mask or deception that Whole Cake Island pulls is the fact that they, kind of similar to Doflamingo, kind of similar to Hody Jones, were born into this sort of thing. They don't really realize that what they're doing is wrong, per se, as they do it. It's just what they've grown into, genetically engineered into. So it's another sort of interesting idea about nature versus nurture, personal agency, culpability, all that sort of thing. Which Oda has been building up, especially post-time skip. Oda's been building up that theme in multiple different ways. We are then introduced to the fact that Big Mom, when she has hunger pangs, goes on a rampage. And this is actually something that ties in directly with her characterization and is really important, and this is the introduction to it here. She is craving, I forget what the food it was, but it was a certain food that was not readily available for her, and so she was rampaging throughout the city. Everyone freaking out, no one really knowing exactly what to do and how to get this food to her. It's super chaotic as her children try to get this food to her. She seems to kill her own son in her blind rage. So, you know, Big Mom is not a nice person, to put it lightly, but she definitely didn't intend to kill her son. Like, this is a blind rage that she goes into where she doesn't really have much control. But then who comes out of nowhere? Jinbei. He gets the food that she needs. It's a croquembouche. I just saw. So Jinbei comes out of nowhere, stops it, you know, obviously being part of a sort of alliance with Big Mom, being familiar with Big Mom. So he stops the rampage, he gives the food, and then he says that he needs to discuss something important with her, to which she kind of gleans that he may want to quit. She says, "You better not be trying to leave me." And she's very, very angry about this, about the prospect of this. So the idea of abandonment is now brought forth from Big Mom. And we know why that is if we know her backstory, but it's nice, very nice sort of foreshadowing and integration from Oda, and a great moment from Jinbei. And let me just bring up something very cool that was brought up to me through my chat, which is the idea that because Germa 66 won the war that I was talking about just a couple minutes ago, they are shown to be these gods, these heroes. But to the opponents, they're the devil. It's interesting how flimsy that can be. And Doflamingo was talking about that very same thing during Marineford, and it's portrayed through his character. You can apply that to Luffy as well. This is a theme. Depending on perspective, someone could be a hero or a devil. That is throughout all of One Piece, and Luffy kind of alludes to it when he says, in Fishman Island, "Decide whether I am a hero or not. It's up to you. I'm not claiming to be anything other than someone who's going to be the king of the pirates. If you think I'm a hero, go for it, but I'm not saying I am. It's up to you." We then see this awesome flashback as Jinbei asks the rest of his crew, or like kind of asks the rest of his crew, the sentiment goes through that it's clear that he wants to leave. He wants to join the Straw Hats. Straw Hat Luffy is someone that will change the world, as he says. And the crew say, just leave and be free. Do your own thing. Don't be burdened by obligations anymore, which he has been for so long. And it's a great moment. It's a great moment as Aladdin says these sorts of things. Aladdin, who is married to Charlotte Praline, allied with the Big Mom Pirates, so we see some of the politics there. But it reminds me a little bit of Frankie. In Water 7 Eni's lobby, how he was supposed to leave and be free. It reminds me a little bit of Sanji in a couple ways. So it's a very Straw Hat-esque departure from his old faction, or his old crew. It's very similar in that way. And ultimately, Big Mom says, okay, you can leave, but she spins some sort of death wheel to see what his punishment will be for leaving. And it's outright stated that people who leave the Big Mom Pirates, many of them aren't able to leave alive. Then we go back to the Straw Hats, where we get a bit of a lore drop from Pedro, who says that him and Peckham's used to search for poneglyphs. And Pedro says, he's very wise here, he's very mature, because he says, you know, once we rescue Sanji and defeat Big Mom, what are you gonna do? And Luffy says, I don't know, like, I haven't thought that far ahead. Very Luffy. But he goes, no, what we have to do is we have to get the road poneglyph. Inu and Neko saw Roger in Luffy. And so he says, we need you to be in ownership of the knowledge of the road poneglyphs. So he kind of lays out the plan. We will get Sanji back, and we will steal the road poneglyph as well. And he kind of, as much as he's talking to everyone else, he kind of reflects to himself of what Luffy could mean, of what it could mean in the grand scheme of the world, and the importance here. And I love this because it's a sort of, Pedro is approached with this beautiful contemplation throughout his character as he thinks about the world and what needs to happen, and makes very, very informed decisions and shares his knowledge with those around him. And this is sort of a precursor to his death scene, and why I think he's so distinct and unique and interesting. And after that, the Straw Hats arrive at Whole Cake Island, and it looks magnificent. It looks beautiful. It's one of the presentation is one of Oda's best in terms of a location for an arc, for sure. And yeah, they can finally start their adventure on Whole Cake Island proper. Now, once they do, Pedro and Brook split away from everyone else to search for the road poneglyph. That is their job. And let me just say here that this leads to some great stuff for Pedro and Brook. They have a really nice dynamic. I like their interactions a lot. I like that Brook gets extra focus here, because I think it was kind of needed, and he does really well. I was pleasantly, not surprised, but I was pleased with how he was approached. And Pedro as well. They work really well as a duo. So them going after the road poneglyphs was awesome, and that's what they do here. Now, I'm not going to talk about the nitty-gritty about this element, or this section of the story, but at the same time, Luffy, Nami, Chopper, and Carrot go into the, what is it called? The Seducing Woods, where they think that they see Sanji. but things are not as they seem, and there are deceptions all over the place, kind of an encapsulation of that deception element of Whole Cake Island. And there are misadventures throughout all of this. We learn about this mirror world, which is, again, kind of an environmental encapsulation of this theme, and honestly, I don't know how I didn't talk about this theme at the beginning of the video, thinking about it now. But yeah, the Seducing Woods, very dark, yet very quirky and enchanting at the same time. That, again, that very Nightmare Before Christmas tone, to subverting sort of Disney-esque environments, perfect for Whole Cake Island. Throughout all this, we are introduced to Charlotte Brûlé, who is actually one of my more favorite new characters introduced in Whole Cake Island. Brûlé's great, though she is just kind of shown to be this sort of caricature of a evil witch in a forest at first, which is again subverted as we learn more about her, but that's her initial sort of role. Very antagonistic, showing these deceptions. And part of her character that is really prominent here is that she's very jealous and envious of others having beauty. She sees Carrot, thinks she's really cute, and she's jealous and says that she wants to tear that beauty to shreds, which is a really good indicator of her characterization and backstory. But we then cut to Sanji, who is overlooking the kingdom of Germa very contemplatively, as this grand kingdom, this grand nation is introduced, and it is vast, and the scale is incredible. But Sanji looks down at it all with this sadness, resignation, and he's talking with Reiju, and he says that I cut my ties with you people. He despises his family. They are this militaristic, autocratic rule, and we know of genetically engineered soldiers who are children, like treats children as child soldiers, not just child soldiers, but genetically engineered ones. And yeah, Sanji is just done with it. He never wanted to come back here, but he's only doing it out of obligation. Reiju, you know, her dialogue's really interesting. She kind of would seem to buy into a lot of the things that Sanji opposes, but kind of talks about his obligations without really seeming to commit to them. And he talks about getting married, and she says, well, Pudding's a lovely person. And it's just a good bit of exposition and building for Sanji's character and the situation of the family. As Judge, Sanji's father, the patriarch of the Germa family, enters, and he tells Sanji to come outside because real men speak with their fists. After Sanji says that you are not my father. I have a real father, but it isn't you, which is a lovely little nod to Zeph. But it was here in my read-through where I started getting more and more sort of disturbed at the extent of the tragedy and darkness of Sanji's past. It is really horrible to witness. I mentioned resignation, and that is a big part of it. Sanji is this kind soul who consistently strived to be more than what he was seemingly stationed to do, but he was taught again and again that he would only ever be punished for that. And there's this constant tug of war between this resignation that I cannot live a life that I would like to live, and yet this seemingly irrational but beautiful yearning for more than that. That is a big part of Sanji's internal character, internal psychology. It stays with him throughout his backstory and when he left for Zeph, but that resignation, that duty, obligation to Zeph for saving him that we learn about in Baratie has a whole new complexion, because now we see that it is born from his family life, from what he believed his role in the world should be. That, hey, if I can just cook here without being fully happy, fully free, that is more than enough. But Zeph tells him that he should, Zeph and Luffy and the crew show him that the world does offer more if you carve it out for yourself. And that is such a beautiful element to his character, and it's so integrative, and it makes him more rich. And this whole backstory is so great for recontextualizing Sanji and adding new layers. So then this fight ensues, and we get a bit of a flashback to Sanji's childhood with with Judge. And we essentially see that he's been raised to be a soldier, to be a fighter, nothing more. Very meritocratic environment where there was no nuance. There was no value in anything other than being strong. And that's how these children were raised. That's what they were graded on. And they were a success if they were strong, and they were a failure if they were not. And that is just this hellish upbringing that Sanji had to endure. And it also adds a little bit of a gray, sort of sympathetic lens to his siblings who have gone through this. And we see them laughing at Sanji and all this stuff. But And while that's obviously horrible, it's hard to put all the culpability with them when that's literally what they were born into. So it's a very disturbing, dark, sad backstory for multiple reasons. Ultimately, Vinsmoke defeats Sanji through sacrificing his soldiers to get through to him. Sort of impaling one to get through and to defeat Sanji. So that's an encapsulation of the difference between the two. Sanji, very compassionate, not wanting to be a part of this culture. Judge being the origin and perpetuator of this culture, sacrificing others for this ultimate ends, which we learn later is to take over the North Blue, using the influence and power he will get through a connection with Big Mom. And this is what we learn as we see this bizarre scene of Reiju sort of tending to Sanji's injuries, and Judge telling him that you are no son of mine because you are not worthy. You are a failure that I'm compensating for through these connections. And at the same time, it's bizarre because Sanji is being sort of domineered in this way, and Reiju is kind of lovingly tending to him. Just there's a sensitivity and a gentleness and a fondness in her expressions as she's tending to his injuries, and then she puts on these shackles that will blow up if Sanji does anything that goes against his marriage. But she even looks loving as she puts those on him. And it's such a bizarre scene, very ironic in a lot of ways, but it's really loyal to the dynamic here. She has had to acquiesce to a lot of the things that go on within the family, but she has cared for Sanji in her own way. Now, it's quite gray. I'm not saying that she's... well, we'll get to it later, but I might as well mention it now. I don't think that Reiju is faultless. She is complicit in a lot of the things she does. Now, did she have much of a choice? Not really, but nonetheless, I think the story and she herself looks at her failure to do more for Sanji, despite wanting to, and despite doing so much for him, as something to lament. That she couldn't help him even more. That despite the little ways she could reach out for him, his life was still hell. I think she regrets not being able to do more, especially when being free of those shackles, so might as well mention that here. She's a great character. We see a scene where Bej, who is married to Chiffon, of the Big Mom family, Big Mom's daughter, shoots Peckhams, who falls into the water, and Brooke and Pedro go throughout the town on their way to try to find the Poneglyph, and they hear rumors that they are being tracked. The Straw Hats, the Alliance, are all being tracked. And at the same time, they see Pudding shopping for her wedding dress. They also learn about Jinbei and him leaving the Big Mom Pirates. Apparently, what's going on is that he retracted his request to leave. So we don't know the situation with what happened with the Wheel of Death at this point, but it seems like it isn't positive. Now, we get a really interesting scene as Big Mom talks to Caesar. Caesar is captured here, and she demands that he turn her family into giant people. And she says he has 2 weeks to do this, otherwise he'll be turned into candy by Pero Sparrow, the Minister of Candy for Totoland, who is interesting design this guy's got. But this is really key. It's key, once again, to Big Mom's backstory, wanting her family to become giant, just like her, putting everyone together, everyone the same, everyone happy. Oh boy. But it's really interesting. And that keys you into the experiments Caesar was doing on Punk Hazard, why specifically he was doing those things with those children. Great integration across hundreds of chapters. Like, this stuff was 150, almost 200 chapters ago, and it's being brought back like this. Like, the foresight, the long-term planning from Oda is spectacular. Then we are sort of properly introduced to Pound, and I'll just talk about him a little bit here. I like Pound. I like him quite a bit. I think the way in which he fixates on the forgotten nature of his relationship with Big Mom is really fantastic and keys you into how dismissive Big Mom can be to these relationships and what her real goal is. Obviously, there's the influence angle, but through her actions, you can see just her wanting to make a ton of children, as big a family as possible, and there are tons of alternate reasons for why she would marry with certain people or have kids with certain people, these men. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is the cruelty here, the dismissiveness from her in forgetting about him. and their daughters. From his perspective, really nails home her depravity in this way. It's really good. It's really good in that way because Pound is quite a caring person. And he's got it's kind of like a funny dialect. I found it pretty humorous. But ultimately, his care for Chiffon and Lola, and that scene towards the end, where he just reaches out and wishes he could talk to his grandchild. The fleeting nature of it, the ephemeral nature of it, was beautiful. Again, the nuances of family, the love one has for a family, whether they've met them or not, whether they're part of them or not, the idea of loving someone before even properly meeting them, knowing that you love them. I think a lot of that is tied to Pound's character and is part of the integrated mosaic that is the idea of family in Whole Cake Island. So Pound's a good character. We also learn throughout this that one of Big Mom's powers is the ability to bring inanimate objects in the kingdom by collecting people's souls. Horrifying, but really, really cool. And kind of gives you some insight into some of the ideas that have been brought forth about the afterlife with regards to Brooke. Now, like I said, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty about the deducing wood stuff, but Chopper and Carrot ultimately get put into the mirror world, which leads to some of my favorite interactions, not just in this arc, but in One Piece. The Chobro, Choniki stuff, it is so cute. Chopper, the idea of putting Chopper and Carrot together, having these misadventures throughout the mirror world, this buddy comedy sort of thing with Choniki, both of them, two of the most adorable characters in One Piece, probably the two most adorable characters in One Piece. I loved it. It was so great for both of them, and especially Carrot. You know, she's introduced to the story, she has this role. How to endear her to your audience? Just put her on a buddy comedy, misadventures sort of thing with Chopper. Have her being really cute throughout all of it. I talked about Carrot before this. She's just a joy to me. She just brings me a lot of happiness. She's really great. And she gets some more substance later on as well, which we'll talk about. Throughout this, though, we learn that Nami's Vive card that she got from Lola is one that belongs to Big Mom. So they end up using that to their advantage really well. Luffy fights with Cracker in a pretty cool fight. We learn that Apu, Kid, a lot of the worst generation, the supernovae, were fought off by Big Mom's forces, just like what was happening to the Straw Hats. Brûlé goes into the mirror world, and during one of the most defining moments of the Cracker-Luffy fight, my favorite moment, Cracker, who is insulting Sanji by insinuating that he would not care about the Straw Hats, he would think of them as pathetic, etc. He says that to Luffy. He says that he would think of them that way. And then Luffy is overcome with rage as he, in Gear 4, punches Cracker with Kong Gun and says, "Don't insult Sanji. Even if he's too happy to want to come back, he would never speak to us like that." So as always, Luffy only wants people on his crew if they want to be there. He's not going to force Sanji to stay on his crew if Sanji really wants to leave. Just like he wasn't going to do that with Usopp. The problem wasn't that Usopp was leaving, or well, at heart it wasn't. Luffy had some problems with sort of abandonment and people leaving that we learned about in post-war. But for the sake of just this discussion, problem wasn't necessarily Usopp leaving. It was him leaving when at heart he didn't want to leave. And that's always been Luffy, the entire way through. He doesn't want to force anyone to be part of the crew. And he sort of illustrates that here. If Sanji is happy and wants to leave, that's okay. Because Luffy loves Sanji and he wants him to, if he's going to be happier apart from him, then he'll miss him, but of course. But what Luffy could not stand for was Cracker insinuating that Sanji would ever look down on them, because that's not the type of person he is. So Big Mom is informed about the movements of the Straw Hats in the Seducing Woods. She also asks about the Vinsmoke siblings, and she's informed that they will arrive quite soon. And then we cut to Sanji and his family, or Sanji in the castle, seeing the return of his brothers, and he is so traumatized, he is so frightened and scared of them, that literally just seeing them walk in towards the castle causes him to shiver in fear, to shake. Your heart just has to go out for him. It is awful. It is horrible. Now, the family has a meal together where the chef, Cosette, is essentially confronted and attacked by Niji. Sanji protects her, and in a mix of two aspects of his character. One, the wasting food aspect, because Niji thinks the food is disgusting and all this sort of thing. And two, his defense and need to protect women. He protects her. He says, "You dare leave a mark on a woman's face, And Reiju says, "What a gentleman," as he does this. Now, this confrontation escalates, and ultimately, Judge threatens the Baratier and Zeph, and says that if Sanji does not comply with their plan, they will be in trouble, which kind of ties his hands up. He would never do anything that would lead them to harm. So, man, this arc is just Sanji suffering. And afterwards, he sees Cosette bloodied and beaten up and bruised and clearly at the ends of some sort of punishment, despite what he did, despite him protecting her. And maybe even him protecting her exacerbated her punishment. So that just really nails in his powerlessness and how his kindness and need to protect others not only will not go rewarded, but will go punished. That is how cynical this world, this setting is. The setting that he's in is. And Sanji says, "I've never seen such wretched cowardice." And Yonji takes him to this sort of lab where these soldiers of Germa 66 are mass-produced. Insane. So now we see that, and I need to read this from the wiki because I wouldn't want to get it wrong. Germa 66's soldiers are all clones of past exceptional soldiers developed using the joint research of Judge and Vegapunk. Sanji is just, in the midst of these revelations, enraged as well of what happened to Cosette. Enraged by this military storage depot, what's going on here, how cruel and almost anti-life it is, and along with Cosette, it just causes him to blow up, and he attacks Niji. And Sanji is defeated, and he's told, "Welcome back to the Vinsmoke family, Sanji. I think it's high time that we reestablish the hierarchy." And this triggers a flashback where Sanji and his siblings are told that they are the heights of scientific achievement, finely tuned biological science. Science rather than love. And Judge nailed this into them. You will be soldiers, you will be generals, you will lead Germa 66 to glory, and that is your job. And if you do not achieve your job, you are a failure. Your entire life is forfeit. That's what these children learned growing up. And that, it's hard to overstate how much that would completely screw them up. Sanji was laughed at for being weak because the only measure of worth was strength. Sanji was shown to be weak because he was just a human. He was just showing all the signs of a regular, average, normal human, and that was failure. Sanji was shown to be a failure because he was kind and fed the mice and cooked for them and did things that went outside of his purview because, God forbid, he have interest in other things. Interest in being compassionate and kind to other people and wanting to see other people smile. We see allusions to the fact that Sanji had some sort of connection with his mother, but that he is kind of chasing her ghost, as Judge sort of puts it, and says he's told to never cook again because it's outside of his duty. There's no purpose to it, and it's unbecoming. He's called a waste of life by Judge. Sanji's siblings learned all this and, of course, they bullied him. Why wouldn't they? From their perspective, why wouldn't they? They've never known kindness or compassion or treating people with humanity or decency. That's what they grew up in, an inherited evil. And ultimately, giving up on Sanji, Judge held this sort of pseudo-funeral for him, for the loss of his son, as Sanji was given this inhumane iron mask and was placed in a dungeon and agonized and lived torturously and consistently resigned himself to apologizing for being weak. This was so formative to Sanji. His inability, his internal inferiority complex with regards to feeling like he cannot reach outwards for more than what he has, for settling, for the resignation, the sort of defeatist mentality. This is all ingrained in him here, and it's so cruel. There's this haunting image of him, hands on the bars, with this mask on. It is so upsetting. As he screams, "I'm sorry for being born weak." And Reiju kind of looks on through all of this. Sanji is held prisoner for 6 months like that, and he's bullied by his brothers after they realize what's going on there, but Reiju patches him up, using the little bit of power and agency she has to help him. And Reiju catches that the Germa kingdom was going to cross from the North Blue into the East Blue, and that this was a good time to escape, as Sanji proclaimed of his dream to be this chef. And so she helps him escape, which is beautiful for her, especially imagine the strength it takes. You know, we've talked about the grayness of her character, which I think is really interesting. But But here I want to talk about her strength, because imagine growing up in the environment that those kids grow up in, and going against that to help someone who is shown and told to them explicitly to be a disgrace. That takes immense strength of will and love for her brother. But Sanji escapes, and Judge, quote-unquote, allows him to, under the condition that he never return again, and that he is not a part of the family. And just like it was before, in the present, Reiju is patching Sanji up, saying, why would you let yourself be shackled by your bonds to these people? Speaking of Zeph and Baratie, and how Sanji is essentially chaining himself down for their safety. Now, right before Sanji and the rest of the Vinsmoke family depart, he offers some insight into how and why he's so, quote-unquote, chivalrous to Reiju. And he says that Zeph beat it into him. Where Zeph essentially says that, let me find this. Sanji as a kid suggests kicking a woman, and then Zeph says a man can't kick a woman. If you ever set a foot off the path of a proper man, then I'll cut off your balls and slit my own throat. Holy shit. But that coalesced with Sanji's protectiveness over women, which has to do with the only two people in his life being anything close to kind to him being women, which we'll talk about later on when we see about his mom. But Reiju being one of them, his mom being another, and therefore looking at women as this as this sanctuary that cannot be tarnished in any way by anyone, as this sanctity, as this serenity that cannot be blemished in any way. This being the reason for why he looks at women the way he does, integrated with what the lessons that Zeph taught him, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. It doesn't make some of the misuse of the trope in like Thriller Bark or Fishman Island, where I think it was done quite badly. It doesn't make that better, but it adds a layer to why he's like that in the first place, and as a result, elevates his character, for sure. Meanwhile, Luffy defeats Cracker, and then after this, Luffy and Nami, despite King Bomb, this tree that I haven't mentioned before, that ends up being their ally, insisting that Big Mom will punish them for this, and that it's futile, and that it's not worth it. Despite all these warnings, Nami and Luffy go out to try to meet Sanji. On the way there, Nami's talking to Carrot and Chopper through this mirror shard, but their connection's severed, so they aren't able to talk with them anymore. But ultimately, King Bomb tells them, hey, look, Germa 66 is up ahead, as Sanji's family is transporting themselves by carriage to the ceremony. And Luffy and Nami are both overjoyed to see him, obviously. They're beaming, they're smiling. Luffy is saying, we came to get you, Sanji, and he's just running towards him. And Sanji just looks terrified. I really have to give it to Oda for these expressions, because they are heartbreaking. Sanji, in this moment, who more than anything wants to see Luffy and go to him and go back with Luffy and hug him and be rescued, but can't for his own safety and for Zeph's safety. He cannot do it. He has to forego the connections that he's made for the safety of those connections that he's made, for the safety of the people. And it is just so conflicting and paradoxical and heartbreaking. But Zeph is a hugely important thing here, and as well, he has these chains on his wrist, these whatever, explosive bracelets, whatever they are, and he's told by his father that if, let me take that back, he's told by Judge that if he is to try to leave the island, they will explode and he will lose his hands. His hands, which are used for cooking. He will never be able to cook again if he tries to leave here, and cooking is everything to him. So really, the three most important things to Sanji, cooking, the Straw Hats, and Zeph, are all at play here. And if he goes with the Straw Hats, he will lose 2 out of 3 of those things. So it is such a difficult situation, and he wants to go with the Straw Hats, but he can't. And as well, like, he knows that Big Mom's wrath will rain upon them if they take him. So their safety is a factor as well. So it's a difficult choice, but in the end, it was never really in doubt. Sanji was always going to put the others ahead of him, and he was never going to give up his hands or his ability to cook, because that's everything to him. His principles, his ideals, they're ironclad. And so Sanji instead tells Luffy no. He kicks him off the carriage, and he says, "Get lost, you miserable, inferior pirates." Literally, almost exactly what Cracker said Sanji would say. As his siblings laugh, and Sanji says, "My name is Vinsmoke Sanji." And he channels a very, like, sort of condescending tone that he's probably heard from his siblings a lot, as he tries to tell off Luffy, saying that they're chuckle-headed idiots, that this is no choice at all for him. He says, "Stop taking the letter I left for you seriously, back off." And then he says, "I'll drive him off." And then we go into the next chapter, which is called Sanji versus Luffy, in one of the most heartbreaking fights in the entire series. Reminds me a lot of Usopp versus Luffy in Water 7, for obvious reasons. But I think what Sanji's doing here is a mix. The dynamic with Sanji and Luffy here is a mix of Robin throughout Enies Lobby Water 7 and Usopp throughout Water 7 Enies Lobby. Robin, who essentially couldn't admit, like, it had to be just driven to the edge to admit that she wants to live and that she wants to be saved and to depend on them. Sanji here, who is pushed to the absolute edge and has to get over his sort of conditioning, his resignation, to stand up for himself and take the life that he desires and deserves. And then also there's the element of him and Usopp both fighting Luffy for differing reasons, but sort of similar reasons in the same vein. But my god, it is a heartbreaking chapter, and the fight ensues. And I gotta say, just as heartbreaking as Luffy and Sanji fighting like this, and Sanji's situation, is Nami, who consistently is screaming throughout it, "Sanji, stop! Just come with us," and just being heartbroken. It is horrible. It is horrible to witness. It is so upsetting. I was crying throughout this chapter. And Sanji kicks Luffy, but Luffy doesn't fight back, and he tells him to put up his fists and fight back, but Luffy just doesn't do it. He says, "I'm not gonna fight you." And then Sanji says, "Okay, so either fight me or disappear." And Luffy says, "I'm not doing that either." And Sanji says, "You always try to get your own way." And yes, he does. That is why he's Monkey D. Luffy. And it's heartbreaking as Sanji lands these hits, and he thinks back to joining the crew when Luffy told him to join, asked him to join. And Nami keeps screaming, and Luffy says, "Don't interfere, this is a duel." And he's just being torn to shreds as he just keeps thinking of his care for Luffy as he does this. And Luffy is completely destroyed. And Nami says, "Okay, Sanji, we'll leave." And Luffy says, "I'm not leaving." Essentially, the fight stops because Luffy is in the ground, nearly unconscious. And as Sanji's about to leave, Nami goes up to him and slaps him across the face, noticeably just calling him Sanji, whereas before she had used some sort of informal honorific. I don't remember the exact one, but she slaps him here, and my god, that has so much impact. That, despite being negative, is the most powerful Sanji-Nami interaction in the story thus far, and my favorite because of how well it's written. And she says, "Goodbye, sorry for overstepping our bounds," and Sanji cannot look at her. He despises what he has had to do. He despises himself for what he just did. And so he can't look at Nami, not in the eye. And Judge says, "Alright, looks like that unnecessary connection has been severed at last." And Luffy gets up as they leave and screams Sanji's name, saying, "You think you can drive me off like this? I know you don't feel this way." And he says, "You can kick me all you want, but you're the one feeling pain." And Sanji gets Sanji gets a flashback to telling Luffy, in one of my favorite scenes in the whole series, "Ever hear of the All Blue?" as the two shared their ideas of dreams and the great expanse and the journey, these kindred spirits. And we cut back and Luffy says, "This voyage isn't over yet. I'll be waiting right here, and if you don't come back, I'll just sit here and starve." He says, "I mean, you're the cook for my ship. I won't eat anyone's food but yours anymore." As Sanji thinks back to when he was bullied and beat up for cooking for rats, and now he has someone who will only eat his food, who loves it that much, who appreciates him for who he is this much, Luffy and the crew. And Luffy is saying, "I will literally eat nothing but your food. I'll sit here and starve," and he means it. And then he says, "Without you, I cannot become king of the pirates," as Sanji, tears just stream down his face. One of the most powerful Straw Hat interactions. Without a doubt. One of the most heartbreaking chapters. And Luffy means it. And just to nail home like what this means, obviously the statement as a whole is monumental, but just add that little detail that Luffy is always eating. He loves food. It's one of the things he lives for. The joys of food in One Piece is one of the more understated when Sanji's not involved, but more beautiful elements of the story. The crew eat together, these parties where everyone shares these meals and drinks and whatever. It is a huge part of the series, food. It is a huge part of Luffy. He's always eating, and he will give up that part of his character, that part of his psychology and mentality, and this part of his life for Sanji. It is gigantic. It is huge. It can't be understated. Now, after this, Big Mom sends this army towards Luffy, knowing of his situation and what just happened and his ultimate goals. She tries to head him off by sending these forces his way, and then she has this dinner or this meal, this banquet with the Vinsmoke family as a sort of ceremony prior to the engagement or the wedding, sort of formalizing it. But throughout all this, Sanji, who's obviously present, just keeps reflecting on Luffy. Meanwhile, Luffy just takes on this literal army, faces against them, saying he made a promise that he would not move from this spot, and he intends to fulfill it. Luffy in a nutshell. As Sanji confides in Pudding and talks about his family, alludes to Luffy and the Straw Hats, talks about the chains he has, how he's trapped, how he's chained, and how his marriage with Pudding is being enforced, because he just needs someone to confide in at this moment. And she says, I won't let our marriage be hell to you. But then we get to a really interesting point where Sanji sees this sort of light beyond the horizon, like, if nothing else, I think this marriage could be good for me. I think this person might be a good person who I could have a happy life with. And so he says to Charlotte Pudding here, let's get married. But it's really funny because the panel where they say let's get married, it's interesting. We see this sort of these high ceilings. We don't see the ceilings, but we can tell they're high. There's this window. There seems to be light coming in. There's this window letting a bit of light in, and this is in black and white, and you can see the two, Sanji and Pudding, embracing, silhouetted against the darkness of the room. And I'm just like, okay, I saw that in black and white. I'm like, all right, I don't know, it's a good panel, it's interesting, it's fine, it's cool. But then I saw it in color, and something about the way it was colored, the darkness of the room, surrounding them, it felt very foreboding to me. Something about the way that the coloring was done for this chapter, 845, made me think, okay, I think Sanji's suffering may not be over, because this just felt very foreboding. This embrace in the middle of this darkness, this seemingly false horizon for Sanji. It turns out I was right. It's funny that it was literally just like the color version of that panel that gave me the hint. You guys probably picked up on something much more explicit or substantial, but whatever works, I suppose. So in the midst of all this, back with Brook and Pedro, who are on this quest to get the road poneglyph, we see that they are guarded by a commander named Charlotte Smoothie, and Pedro says that he'll become a distraction if Brook goes in and gets it. So they're continuing with their thing. Sanji also tells Big Mom that he will offer no resistance at all if she allows his crewmates, the Straw Hats, to leave free. Allow them to leave, let them be safe, and I'll offer no resistance at all. I'll do it with no problems. As directly prior to this, King Bomb seems to be killed, and Nami and Luffy are captured, and the Vive card is taken as well. I do have to mention that, despite not having a ton to say about it, the adventures of Choniki and Carrot continue as they sort of confront Brule, and Brule's got them captured and they sort of maneuver their way around. So that's still going on in the background, and it's still amazing. I just don't have a ton more to say about it than I already said, but it's great, and it adds great levity and balance, and I think it's really important for the pacing and sort of tone of Whole Cake Island, because this is devastating darkness all throughout. But the levity is really important, I think. It's not done in a way that's jarring or too whiplashy. It's very endearing, and it's nice. It works really well for the flow, to pad things out in a really good way, keeping in mind the importance of respite and levity. Now, Big Mom tours the Vinsmoke family, where she shows them these captured humans, beasts, all these sorts of creatures that are shown inside of books. Judge then asks Big Mom why there aren't any giants in Toto Land, as Big Mom seems to be collecting all manner of creatures, pretty much anything that roams the land, and seems to be collecting them. But he says, I don't see any giants, and this gets Big Mom very upset. Now, this is great foreshadowing for the fact that she has always wanted, since she was a child, to have this grand tea party of every sort of person, for them all to for the differences between species to not be an issue and for them to just be together and enjoy each other and their company and have this beautiful time. Oh, also worth noting that Chopper and Carrot are captured by Brûlé with the goal of making them a part of Big Mom's collection. But anyway, this giant thing that Judge brings up is really, again, great foreshadowing. Big Mom is such a really, really fantastically constructed character. Anyway, she leaves here, and then she actually calls Luffy and Nami, who are captured. Luffy says that he's here to get Sanji back, that he wants to fight Big Mom, all that sort of thing. And Big Mom says something that akin to the idea of people like you are a dime a dozen on the Grand Line. Very similar to what Crocodile said to Luffy all the way back in Alabasta. She's like, you think you deserve to have an audience with me like this? Who do you think you are? Like, the world is so much bigger than that. Which was interesting, and I think well-placed, and worked really organically, dramatically for this point in the story. But Big Mom says, no, Sanji and Pudding's wedding is very important and special to me. They mention the Tamate box, which we know is full of explosives now, from Fishman Island. And then Nami mentions Lola, who is obviously close with Nami on Thriller Bark. And Big Mom essentially has no qualms about saying that Lola doesn't matter to her at all. She doesn't care. She couldn't care less about Lola. She thinks of her as an ingrate. She doesn't think about her as her daughter anymore because she was arranged a political marriage and she spurned it. And now we have context for Lola and falling head over heels with all these sort of people on Thriller Bark. Again, amazing foresight by Oda. Whether he planned this exact thing all the way back on Thriller Bark years and years prior, or filled in the gaps of what was in his eyes, a funny character gag with this, it's so integrative, it's insane. It doesn't matter. It's super impressive either way. But we can see Big Mom looks at her children as tools. If they do not contribute to her influence and her overall goals, which are ironically seem to be in parallel with the idea of caring for your children. You know, togetherness, connection, all these people at one table together, celebrating. Caring for your children seems to be in line with that, but if this irony is crazy, if Lola does not contribute to that, she is useless, she is worthless, and so she doesn't care about her. So again, great irony to do with Big Mom and her fragmented psychology. It's paradoxical in a lot of ways, but intentionally so, because Big Mom has such a broken psychology, broken mentality because of her upbringing and experiences and how she has never moved on from that it makes sense. And on the way to that influence is a desire to become king of the pirates. So we have the parallel here, or we have a parallel. Big Mom and Luffy, two people who gain all sorts of connections, who want to become king of the pirates, who love this camaraderie and these connections, but for entirely different reasons, and in entirely different ways. Fantastic parallel. And in the meantime, Sanji just begs internally, or externally, but to himself, for the Straw Hats to be okay. Meanwhile, Pedro and Brook continue with their operation, as Brook gears up to do some sort of performance as Pedro does a distraction. Now, Brook and Pedro continue with their operation, and Big Mom is notified of it, and it makes a bit of a commotion, because these are important things that are being stolen from her. She thinks of the Tamate box. They're after something else, but nonetheless. And Pedro is showing out. Brook has this insane Soul King ghostly concert. It's awesome stuff as they go about their jobs and try to get this road poneglyph. It's great stuff. It's awesome. But while everyone's distracted, in the middle of this commotion, Pudding goes to Luffy and Nami, and she says she's not going to marry Sanji. He proposed to her, but she's not going to marry him, and she's very tearful. But then she kneels over to Luffy, who is obviously captured in prison, his hands are in chains, and whispers something to him, and he looks horrified, and he says, wait, what did you say? And Pudding says goodbye, and she looks at him with tears in her eyes. So I think there are a couple of things you could think of at this point. One, sort of a self-sacrificial, altruistic sort of element to this, her sacrificing herself maybe for Sanji's happiness, for the Straw Hats, or something like that. Another angle is she is a liar, that she's not going to be marrying Sanji because she is in the vein of Thriller Bark in general, or excuse me, in the vein of Whole Cake Island in general, being deceptive as Sanji gathers flowers. And if you combine that with the sort of color tone hint I got earlier, I really felt like there was something dark going on rather than something tragic here. And so at this moment, I started being suspicious of Pudding. We get some background info about the plans of Germa and the Vinsmoke family, where they say it's stated that after the wedding, Sanji and Pudding are to be taken back to the Germa kingdom to not be controlled by Big Mom. So they have an alliance here, but it's an uneasy one, and they don't trust them, and they realize that they're both kind of in it for themselves. Mutual benefits, but after this they don't want to be taken advantage of, so that's their plan. Meanwhile, my two goats, Chopper, Choniki, and Carrot take over Mirror World by defeating Brûlé. And then a lot of stuff happens at once. We see that Reiju is very hurt, making her way through some sort of hallway. Sanji is cooking food for Pudding. Big Mom goes to confront Brook, and Pedro is facing Tamago. And it's revealed that Pedro actually 5 years ago, had 50 years of his lifespan taken off by Big Mom. And so it's stated here that Pedro came to Whole Cake Island here not intending to leave alive. He is here to help out Luffy and co. because he believes in the cause and what Luffy may do in the future in Wano for the Kozuki clan, how he may bring this long night to an end. And so he wants to contribute to that, but he doesn't expect to live past this. My god, Pedro, just going back on it and reliving these moments now, Pedro really is a great character, isn't he? And we see that Pedro lost 50 years of his life after spinning that wheel that we saw that Jinbei spun earlier, which obviously gives you sympathy for Pedro, but also makes you kind of dread whatever it is that Jinbei did, or whatever it was that he spun. And we see that years ago, he took Tamago's eye out. This was a grave crime, and so to atone for it, to return back and contribute to the end of the long night, he took his own eye out as penance, just to live a little bit. And Big Mom was impressed by this. She went, okay, he was owed 60 years. He took out his eye, and that gave back 10. So 50 years it was. And he proclaims that the Straw Hat crew saved his life, and this is in the present again. And he needs to help them and contribute to the birth of a new dawn. Again, I think this is so integrated with Luffy. I really think that a lot of these things, Pedro's sacrifice, Luffy, and the imagery of the sun, and the long night being Kaido, and Luffy and Momo, and Odin and Roger, and all this stuff, I think it's all going to coalesce in Wano, and I think this is a precursor to it, as Pedro talks about the end of the night, as he defeats Tamago. Meanwhile, Luffy is enraged, as he says that Pudding actually told him, when he whispered, that Sanji will die during the ceremony. They will have the wedding, and then Sanji will be riddled with bullets, and that Luffy won't make it out alive either. So she puts on this show, as he tells Luffy that. She just can't hold herself back. And Luffy reveals this to Nami, as Sanji is bringing food over to Pudding. And at the same time, Pudding is talking to Reiju, who is injured, who she has hurt, as she makes fun of Sanji. And Sanji overhears this, and is heartbroken. Because she, at this point, was his only ray of light, really. And you feel quite bad for him. Like, the imagery, I mean, he's in the rain, his cigarette's out, his whole family will be put to death. That is the plan here. And so, he once again not only feels trapped, but culpable. Against his better judgment, you know, he hates his family, but he also doesn't want them to be killed like that. They are his family, as much as he despises them. And this is something that's tackled later on, but I might as well just say it here. So, it's crazy for Sanji. Not only has he been betrayed by someone he trusts because of his compassion and kindness, not only is he chained, not only was he forced to go against the Straw Hats and try to isolate them away from him and say things that went entirely against his heart. Not only is he being blackmailed, not only is he worried about the Straw Hats, not only is he worried about Zeph, and Zeph could potentially be put to death, and not only is he worried that he could lose his ability to cook, one of his greatest joys in life, but taking the only path he thought he could will still lead to his death and the death of his family, who, despite hating, he still feels like he doesn't want them to die like that. This is Pudding's plan, this is Big Mom's plan. And he hears this, and he just feels broken. He's broken. And you just feel so sorry for him as he hears Pudding make fun of him. Think of him as pathetic. This one person he confided in, who he thought he could trust, who he thought understood him, makes fun of him. And we see here, sorry, I don't know how I didn't mention this, but Pudding has a third eye. She has these two eyes, and what's usually covered by her fringe, by her hair, is a third eye. And I will admit, going against sort of the themes of this arc, or the themes of Sanji's kindness and compassion, this scared me. Maybe I'll insert the clip here. This did scare me. I was just like, whoa, what the hell? Why is she with... That's so funny. Huh? What the... What is this? Yeah, but I kind of feel bad about the reaction now. But not really, because she's quite villainous in this moment. But yeah, throughout this, Sanji's unable to light his cigarette, like I mentioned. Big Mom overpowers Brook, and he proclaims to her that he needs to get the road poneglyph so they get something out of this. Against all odds, he needs to do this. He says, even in the worst case scenario, if Sanji doesn't come with us, I will at least get this. And he calls her a young lady in the midst of it, which is a hell of a power move. Brook is crazy good this arc. Now, Chonaki and Carrot go throughout the mirror world trying to find their friends. Just any of their friends. And we cut back to Reiju and Pudding, and we see that Pudding has had the Memo fruit, which is such a cool power, such an interesting power, and leads to such emotions down the line, where she can take out someone's memories from their head, collect them, switch them around. So what she does is she takes out this sort of, what is essentially a confession to her wrongdoing that she gave to Reiju, as she needed to get this off her chest and boast or whatever, and replaced her memories of that with a memory of a soldier who got hit by a stray bullet. So that is the explanation that Reiju has in her mind for how she gets injured, and she loses the memories of any culpability that Pudding has. So Pudding has this really cool power for memory alteration, which I like quite a bit, especially with how it's presented in the anime as well, but I like how it's done in the manga a lot of the time. Now Luffy is raging at the idea, everything that Pudding told him, at Sanji being in danger, at everything. But him and Nami are just captured, and Nami is being subjected to essentially torture, life-threatening torture, to give up Lola's location, even though she doesn't want to sell her out. And they are at their lowest here. Something needs to happen for them to make an ascent, maybe due to the connections they've made in the past. Luffy feels that he has no other choice but to rip off his arms to be free. My god, like, the Attack on Titan parallels with that one. If you know, you know. But that is the extent of how much he needs to get out of this, how enraged he is. But like I said, it seems that they need help from something, somewhere, and what happens? Out of seemingly nowhere, after being gone for a number of chapters since we saw him take the death wheel or whatever, Jinbei comes, amazing spread, as he punches Charlotte Opera and says that he's here to free Nami and Luffy. Love it. The perfect moment for Jinbei to come back into the story and start doing proper... I mean, he was kind of doing Straw Hat things in Fishman Island already, but like, while he hasn't had a Straw Hat introduction scene, which I think will probably come, he's had a leaving his old place, his old crew scene. So he's kind of doing Straw Hat stuff, even if he's not officially a Straw Hat, maybe. Or maybe Oda just decided to do it differently this time around. I don't know. Either way, he's here, he's helping the Straw Hats, he's helping his crew, and yeah, it's now time for the ascent. And just some bits of insight, actually, I got from Kerbex from chat, who said that Luffy first meets Jinbei when he saves him from a cell, and they reunite with Jinbei saving Luffy from a cell, which is beautiful poetry. It's very beautiful because in a roundabout way, Sanji's love and kindness and compassion are rewarded, because he wouldn't have overheard Pudding saying these things, and he wouldn't have been forewarned if he wasn't kind enough and loving enough to cook for her and bring food to her. So he would have died. He wouldn't have known about the plan if he didn't do that. Rewarded for his love. And one more detail is that Zeph told Sanji when he left Baratie not to catch a cold, and then when he's at his lowest, absolute lowest point, with seemingly nothing left, he's out in the rain, unable to light his cigarette, the conditions for catching a cold. Now, Sanji finds Reiju in the infirmary with these false memories, but Sanji tells her what really happened. And through all of it, Reiju alludes to something that I think is very key to Sanji's character that I kind of alluded to already, but the idea that Sanji is always chained by servitude. Because of how bereft he was of kindness throughout all of his life, he sees it as whenever someone shows him kindness, he is in servitude to them. He felt that way to Zeph. He feels that way about women in general because of his relationship with Reiju and his mom. And Reiju kind of tells him, you gotta stop that. You gotta value yourself more. And it's a beautiful little scene, as she also condemns Germa fully, because she says, okay, well, everyone thinks that I don't know this info, but I do, and you do because of his kindness. And Reiju says, I think Germa ought to be destroyed as it is now. We'll let it happen. You save yourself, but we'll let it happen. And Sanji's worried about her, and this is where she starts telling him about the servitude stuff. And then we get a bit of an exposition dump about the circumstances of Sanji's mom and his birth, and a lot of things to do with the family, as Judge wanted to make them into these soldiers. Sora, who's Sanji's mom's name, didn't want that. She wanted them to be her children. She wanted them to live as regular people. She tried to take medication that would stop this at a great harm to her body, but it didn't really work. Or rather, it seemed like it didn't work until Sanji, where he seemed to have human emotions. He seemed to be different. He seemed to be normal. And as a result of this poison, she poisoned herself, basically. As a result of this poison, she grew weaker and weaker. And ultimately, it led to her being weak and succumbing. And Sanji starts thinking of it in his sort of negative way, saying, it was because of me that she died. And Reiju says, stop it. Stop thinking that way. It is not because of you. Don't think of it that way. She had no regrets. It was her choice. And she was happy that you ended up that way. Don't take ownership of that, because one, it's too much on yourself. You're putting too much pain upon yourself. And too much, again, you're chaining yourself. But two, it takes away agency from a decision that was 100% his mother's. As we see interspliced images and memories of Sora telling Reiju that Sanji is the sweetest boy. He cooked for her. He's just normal, sweet boy. He's a loving boy. And how overjoyed she was about that. And so Reiju saying, don't you dare take that away from her. And don't you dare put it on yourself. So of course, Judge was upset at this and mistreated him accordingly. But at the end of the day, Sanji's mother, their mother, gave herself up for him and the emotions that he has. That he was told were a curse, but they are actually a blessing. He is a miracle of a child. And Reiju says, that's what you stand for, Sanji. It's why you were born kinder and gentler than anyone. And it's a beautiful summation of why Sanji is different, what he means, what he stands for, and why he's a perfect Straw Hat. And she tells Sanji, you gotta go back with your crew. That's where you belong. We gotta find a way out. Just as she did in the past when she helped him escape to Zeph, she gives him the encouragement to do it again here. And this is why I love Reiju. She's not shown to be a saint, but how could you be a saint in the situation she was in? She did what she could, and here, it was enough. Meanwhile, Jinbei, Luffy, and Nami continue their sort of uprising and escape. They free the creatures and monsters and people from the books, and they go to try to find Sanji. One lovely detail about this Sanji backstory, or his mom's backstory, is that his mom sacrificed himself for Sanji. And Sanji here is self-sacrificial for other people. That's part of her traits, her personality, her will that he inherited, like mother, like son. So at this point, Brook is captured by Big Mom. Pudding goes to Big Mom, and we kind of get them sort of plotting together, and Brook sees this. And then we have Pedro fighting, but Chopper and Carrot pull him into Mirror World, with Carrot using these hilariously, like, sort of shoujo drawings to identify the rest of the Straw Hats and make their way over to them. It's really good. And then we learn that Nami is with Jinbei, and these two look great together, I just gotta say. Nami has this new getup with these very puffy pants. She looks great. She looks great on Jinbei's back. It's cute. But Luffy escapes the prison, and Reiju pulls him into a room and sort of explains to him that Sanji knows about Pudding. So he's kind of empowered by that and encouraged by that, but nonetheless goes to meet him at the place where he promised to wait. Sanji has this food that he made for Luffy, and Bobbin, one of the Big Mom forces, he tries to eat it, and Sanji just fights him off and continues to go to where he knows Luffy is going to be waiting. Meanwhile, Nami and Jinbei get pulled into Mirror World with Chopper and Carrot. They then have quite a few of them there. Nami, Chopper, Carrot, Pedro, Jinbei. All of them then find Brook, who Big Mom is sleeping with, like kind of like a teddy bear, and it's a really sort of funny, clever little segment where they get Brook away from Big Mom, and Brook also copies the poneglyph, the road poneglyph stuff. He copies it, and he achieves his job, he achieves his mission. Sanji then arrives at the location where Luffy said he'd wait, and he hears a big stomach growl, and he sees Luffy, completely dehydrated, starving, but he has kept his promise. He's waiting where he said he would wait, and he has not eaten a thing since he said that he wouldn't. So Sanji then gives Luffy this meal that he's made for him, and he says, you know, it's been ruined, it's dirty, it's been rained on, it's all messed up, and Luffy, as he has done the entire time, eats it gratefully, knowing that it has the sort of defining love that Sanji puts into everything he does. No problems with it whatsoever, doesn't care that it's wet and rained on and dirty or whatever, he just loves the food wholeheartedly. And Sanji just calls him a liar and looks away, just valuing so much what Luffy has done for him, and the way he's allowed him to carry out his dreams and live his life. But Sanji tells Luffy, I can't join back up with you. One, I've completely went against your authority as captain. 2, Zeph and the Baratie are at risk because of the blackmail. And 3, his family are going to die at the wedding. And despite hating them, he cannot let them die. He just doesn't have it in him. And Sanji says, for those reasons, get out of here. Like, I can't return with you. And Luffy, Sanji not seeing, again, kind of similar to Robin, kind of similar to Usopp in a couple ways, but mostly Robin here. Sanji not seeing that Luffy is here for him, that his burdens are Luffy's burdens, that Luffy will do anything to help him. And Luffy's upset by that, because Sanji doesn't see that. So he punches him in the face to sort of wake him up and say, I'm here for you. We're here for you. We're gonna do this together. So that's the sentiment behind it, but Luffy says out loud, tell me how you really feel. He wants Sanji to say that he wants to return, very similar to Robin. And he says, I want to return to the Sunny, but I don't have the guts to run away. And then he kind of talks about, he sort of rehashes his problems. And Luffy says, yeah, you want to help your family because that's who you are. You've always been kind, you've always been caring, and I knew this about you from the beginning. So let's do it. Let's crash this wedding. It's a beautiful scene. It's a beautiful sort of end to this bit of Sanji's fracturing and return to the Sunny. It's beautiful stuff. It's some of the best Straw Hat material, not just post-time skip, not just in this arc, but in the entire series. So Luffy and Sanji contact the rest of them, the rest of the Straw Hats, Jinbei, and they talk to them about the plan, or like what their intent is. Jinbei then suggests to team up with Capone Bej, who has motives to take down Big Mom. So they may not necessarily be allies, or they may not know each other that well, they may not see eye to eye overall, but they should team up with them, because they have a common enemy. So Bej, who has a bunch of authority, who's called Godfather by those around him, says, you know, sure, we'll do it, but if he tries anything funny, it's over. And notably, we see a character in Bej's sort of retinue who looks very similar to Caesar. Very similar. But the Straw Hats eventually meet with Bej. The women are allowed to sort of bathe, and they get to know Chiffon, who's Bej's partner, who was treated horribly because she looks a lot like Lola. She's one of Big Mom's daughters. Because of Lola's quote-unquote sins or misdeeds. So she's down for betraying her. I say betraying like there's a negative connotation to it, but fighting back against Big Mom. So she's down with this plan. Bej is down with this plan. They have a baby named Pez, and some details are that the family Lola was going to be married off to, that she didn't agree with, was the Prince of Elbaf, Loki, which is really interesting. An alliance with Elbaf that was spurned. Anyways, the rest of the Straw Hats meet with Bej to sort of discuss this alliance that they've got together. Luffy immediately calls out that Gangster Gastino is Caesar. There's a bit of a scuffle as Luffy is upset at Bej for mistreating Peckhams and for everything he's done to Peckhams. And here we see Jinbei's utility. One of his greatest traits, his maturity, his ability to think, to be a forward thinker, to look at the bigger picture, to put emotions aside and do what's best. Jinbei works as a second first mate in the way that Zoro does, but with some worldly experience and connections and knowledge and wisdom. So here he says to everyone, you know, put aside these petty squabbles. We have an overall goal, a big picture thing we have to do. So let's do it. And Luffy needs that. He absolutely needs that because he can get sidetracked by emotions. He is human. He is not perfect. He is immature at times. He is impulsive, headstrong, stubborn, and he needs to be checked a little bit. And Zoro does that a lot, but Zoro's not here, so Jinbei does it here. So they go over a plan to defeat Big Mom. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but it requires Luffy being put at a vulnerable position and being sort of kind of like bait, which he agrees to. Sanji having to go through with the wedding as normal, despite the risks. And those are important key character elements to it. But yeah, they have this gigantic plan. It's a little bit before at the time that they do this, it's 3 hours before the wedding. So they have to get into position, they have to get ready, and everyone disperses, and yeah, they have this big plan. It feels very like heist-like, and it's thrilling. I love it. And then a new day is dawning as this gigantic wedding ceremony is about to take place. We see people arriving at this ceremony. Big Mom's waking up, Sanji's siblings and Judge are looking for Reiju. She's doing other preparations in another room, interesting, and Pudding's contemplating what she's about to do. And she doesn't look entirely convinced. She looks a little hesitant, and this is key. This is really great expressions and drawings from Oda to illustrate that, while she seemed quite heinous, there's some hesitance in her face, in her eyes, as she talks about how Sanji idiot's gonna die and there's gonna be blood all over her dress. She doesn't look entirely convinced. Peckham's talks with Aladdin and the rest of the Sun Pirates, and we get a bit of a flashback to when Jinbei left, and we see how grateful he was to Peckham's for getting the information he got. It's a nice little wrap-up for that element of the story, that little plot thread. Reiju is thinking of Sanji and wondering, what's your plan? What's going to happen? I love having her perspective throughout all of this. But yeah, these guests start arriving for the wedding, and we're introduced to a bunch of new characters. I'm not going to mention a ton of them. Stussy's worth mentioning. Then we have this character named Big News Morgans, and I have lots of thoughts about this guy. I think he's a great minor character in terms of screen time, but actually major in terms of his impact on the story, on the setting, on the lore, the narrative, everything. I think Morgans is quite essential to the One Piece story, but I will talk more about that in the Zoe video. But let me just say here, his introduction is a bit low-key, but once you learn his role in the story, it is very revelatory, and I love it. Morgans is such a great character to introduce, especially at this point in the story when we've seen 850, 860 chapters of propaganda. This guy who is essentially the face of this propaganda, the narration, the voice of it. It puts a face to and a personality and a figurehead to a lot of the things that we've been attributing to the nameless propaganda machine, one way or another, positive or negative. And learning the true nature of what he's like is really, really engaging. But I'll talk more about that in the Reverie video. But there are great spreads. We see these guests arriving and at different parts of the island and making their way up. And Bej is obviously undercover doing his job. He's acting kind of as security, and this guy, Jigra, an organ dealer, he says that he doesn't consent to being frisked, to have his person checked by Bej, and he's causing a bit of a problem. And then he gets shot out of nowhere by someone who was able to predict exactly what he was going to say before he got shot. And that is Charlotte Katakuri, the second son of Charlotte, the Sweet Three General of the Big Mom Pirates. One of the coolest character designs in all of the series. One of the, well, let me just say it here, best antagonists in the entire series. I love Katakuri. If you couldn't tell by the way I talked about him earlier, I adore him. I think he's amazing. He's awesome. His dynamic with Luffy is amazing. The way it connects to the overall themes of the arc, his place in the family, his family. He was such a great addition to this arc. He is one of the stars. Him and Sanji, to me, are the two stars of this arc. And his introduction was very, very impactful. You immediately stand up and take notice that this guy is a little bit different. But we don't get characterization for him for quite a while. Yet, this introductory stuff, this leaves an impact and makes you really curious about what this guy's about. Then, Big Mom greets the procession. She says hello to everyone. And she says, let's get this party started. She says, you're all in for a real show today. twisted considering what her plans are. We then build up to the wedding. Big Mom is really fixated on that tamate box and wants to open it later in the day after the wedding. The plan is sort of being put into motion behind the scenes. Sanji is thinking about Pudding and what he has to do, and the fact that he's actually like attracted to her still. As they talk about what they're gonna do, Sanji is just kind of freaking out about how attracted to her he is, and Pudding's going, my god, this guy's an idiot. You know Sanji's gonna commit to it despite this, but it makes you wonder a little bit about her. Like, she's frustrated with him, but there was that expression before. Meanwhile, the party is starting, everything's getting started. There are great spreads of celebrations and eating and revelry, yet we see Sanji's siblings having fun and eating. We see a lot of Big Mom's kids and generals and the other guests from around the world, and yet we see Reiju, who looks very concerned in the midst of all this, wondering what Sanji's gonna do. Lovely little touch. And Sanji and Pudding emerge, and Sanji just looks happy as hell. He's got that ugly pervert look on his face, and Bej is going, my god, this guy's such a great actor. He's not acting. So the plan is well and truly into motion as the wedding is starting in earnest, and Pudding, expecting that when she reveals her third eye, Sanji will think it's horrifying and hideous, takes off the veil, and Sanji is actually just kind of entranced as everyone watches on. Katakuri, Reiju, Sanji's siblings, the rest of the Big Mom's pirates, the guests, everyone looks on. Bej, as the plan is in motion, and Sanji he's captivated. He looks at this eye and calls it beautiful. And in spite of herself, Pudding starts crying out of all three eyes, having been bullied for it all her life, having been told that she is a horrifying creature, having been told that she's ugly, that she's a monster, that she's gross, that she's creepy, told to grow out her bangs and hide that aspect of herself because she's just ugly, having been told that by her mother. And now we see how she's grown in defense to be this repulsive person, because she has tried to repel people from her, because she's only ever learned pain. Whenever someone gets close to her, whenever they learn of her true form, quote unquote, they just call her ugly, gross, they run away, they hide, they laugh at her. So she, in a sort of defense mechanism, psychologically, has grown to be this repulsive of a person. It just makes sense, it's just human nature. And yet, Sanji is the first person who embraces it, who thinks it's beautiful, and so she is touched by this. And it turns out that Sanji was, in a roundabout way, kind of right about her. She wasn't actually that awful a person at heart. She was just hurt and lashed out. And he reaches her through his kindness, and she isn't able to go through with it. And Katakuri, who can see the future, knows that if the priest shoots his gun instead of Pudding, Sanji will dodge it, so he takes out the priest first. Really cool little moment as we sort of key ourselves into Katakuri's role and powers and everything. And Luffy and co take this as a signal to gate crash everything. And then a bunch of Luffys burst out of the wedding cake and enter the scene. Obviously, part of this is due to Brulee's power. So we learn that Big Mom is actually very protective of a picture of Mother Carmel, who is said to be her mother. And so Luffy tries to attack it, but he is stopped by Katakuri. Jinbei then counteracts that and says, no matter what, I am leaving the Big Mom pirates. Kind of? An induction into the Straw Hats? Kind of? I don't know, we keep inching towards it, but I don't know if it's official just yet. Either way, it's semantics. He's part of the crew. I'm just really fixated on that official welcome to the crew scene, if there's gonna be one. And what I love is that Big Mom tries to take away his lifespan, but that only works if he fears her, and he does not fear her, not for a second. And in this spread, which is kind of clumsily actually put together, I noticed a couple times throughout Whole Cake Island, there have been some spreads that were not super clean, and lots of people in my chat agreed as well. It seems like there were chapters here and there, starting around Whole Cake Island, maybe a little bit before, but mostly Whole Cake Island is where it's noticeable, where Oda just wanted to finish chapters on a very specific note, so in these spreads, he stuffed lots of things in, and so it looks a bit messy sometimes. Either way, not a big deal. Great spread, as Jinbei says, I appreciate all you've done for me, but I quit. The Big Mom Pirates. And Brook, disguised as in this hilarious way as a Luffy, walks over to the picture of Mother Carmel and destroys it. He breaks it. Brooke is just one of the MVPs this arc, absolutely. Now, Big Mom is shocked by this. Pudding, who's still kind of rattled, tries to finish the job with Sanji, but her heart isn't really in it. She isn't really focusing. Yeah, you can tell, and so she's unsuccessful. All the while, Sanji is saying, like, I know you're... Essentially, he's saying a lot of things to her, but the heart of it is, I know you're hurt. I know you're hurting. You fooled yourself into believing that you are this repulsive person for your own sake. But I don't think that's you. Essentially saying that. Pedro joins the fray. Bej pretends to capture Luffy. It is just mayhem. And at the same time, at the table of the groom and the bride's families, the Charlotte family are holding the Vinsmoke family at gunpoint. And Judge is genuinely very upset by this, which is really interesting. It's like the most emotive in this way. He has tears in his eyes that we've seen him. And Morgan's in the back is just going, big news? I love him. But as Judge is sort of acting in shock in this way, Reiju kind of looks at him from the side and goes, Judge is disturbed because his kids don't seem that bothered by the fact that they've been betrayed like this. But Reiju's going, you made them this way. You took away their heart. They don't even seem human to me. So why are you surprised by this? Now, Katakuri is looking pretty concerned, meaning that he's seen a future that he doesn't think is desirable. And Bej, who is really rock and roll throughout this section of the arc as we ramp towards the climax, just goes, everyone has an equal right to change the future. You can see a bit into the future, but that's all. That ain't some special privilege. Everyone has an equal right to change it. Meanwhile, Big Mom starts spiraling into this gigantic rage. And it makes you wonder, who is this Mother Carmel? What is she to her? Now, the goal here, all along from Bej and Luffy and crew, is to make Big Mom scream. So now she's spiraling into a rage, but she hasn't screamed. And this scream will send out this shockwave that will knock everyone out. Meanwhile, the team will be wearing earphones or earplugs, so they'll not be affected by it. That's the goal. For that to happen, it's to knock everyone out, then to get in, get Sanji, save the day, get out of there. So the picture is broken, but she hasn't screamed. And then Luffy shows Big Mom the remains of the picture, how it's broken. And then she lets out that scream. And, you know, it's a little gratifying because the plan's working out, but it feels wrong at the same time. It feels sad. It feels twisted and tragic because the tone is not triumphant. We are enacting pain upon Big Mom. We don't have the context, but there is immense pain in her scream, in her eyes, the tears in her eyes, as she thinks of her mother. And it's clear that there is some deep, dark past, some tragedy behind Big Mom and why she is the way she is. And we get that from this spread. Beautifully composed, beautifully drawn, expressive, beautifully paneled. But what it really gets across is that Big Mom is a tortured individual. And in the wake of this destruction, everyone's flopping all over the place who wasn't aware that this was going to happen. And in this very gratifying panel, we have Sanji standing over his father, above him, for the first time metaphorically, and maybe physically as well, in his life. And as gratifying as that is, as much as it feels like just desserts, Sanji has always planned to free them, and he does free them. And in the mayhem, Bej is about to poison Big Mom with these poison bullets, but we're then sent into her mindset. We're sent into a flashback of Big Mom. And this is something I was excited for and waiting for a while, because she's such an interesting personality. And you just wonder, why is she this way? As she thinks to Mother Carmel and wonders, why did you leave me 63 years ago? Where did you go? Why did you just vanish? And this is on Elbaf that she vanished. And we are ushered into Big Mom's backstory. So we see that at this point, 63 years ago, Big Mom, or rather Charlotte Linlin, was abandoned by her parents who thought of her as not worth the hassle on Elbaf. And she was looked at as this hassle and different because of her massive size and how it could lead to all sorts of problems with other children, just in general. But nonetheless, she was taken in by Mother Carmel, who seemed to be the picture of kindness, compassion, this beautiful maternal nature. And what's emphasized here is that Linlin had a good heart. She wanted to get to know other people, but often did things that would repel them from her. But she never meant harm. There was this one instance where she wanted this bear and this wolf to get along, so she put them together in the same cage. Then, when the bear ate the wolf, she smacked the bear to teach it that that's not right, and it killed the bear. Essentially, she's just got a good heart, but has not been told, 1, to control her strength, 2, simple things about the world, and 3, how to communicate and express herself with other people in a way that doesn't put this filter behind her intent and her actions. She never really properly was able to learn how to grow up. However, Mother Carmel understood her at heart, and she said, okay, you wanted the bear and the lion to, or the bear and the wolf to get along. That's very sweet of you. You're so kind. And everyone, you gotta forgive Lin. You gotta forgive her. She means well. She said that to the other kids in this orphanage she had. And this place was a place where everyone's pasts and where they came from could be forgotten, and they could just live in the now and be happy. Now, there was this type of food called semla, but there was also this tradition that happened during this festival where everyone had to do 12 days of fasting. Oh, and by the way, we see Haruden here as well. We also see Dory and Bragi, so very cool little nods there and bits of continuity. But yeah, as there is this fast, Big Mom starts craving this semla, and she goes on this rage when she's unable to get it. She just spirals out of control and is unable to be calmed, and is just hurting people right and left, and goes on this rampage, and there's this destructive spread as we see all the violence she has wrought. She destroys the entire village of Elbaf, and the chief goes to try to kill her, and he says she's a god of disaster, and Mother Carmel seems to try to defend her, saying no, she isn't. Or, sorry, let me just correct myself. We don't see Dory and Bragi. We hear of their absence in this chapter. So what ends up happening here is that in this magnificent spread, Big Mom in her rage injures Jorl, or however you pronounce it, the chief of Elbaf. And Mother Carmel creates the first homie, which ended up being a sun homie, to sort of appease and reach out to Lin. And ultimately, because of this destruction that's been wrought, Mother Carmel and her kids and Lin are forced to leave. And Mother Carmel seems to be super kind in saying, okay, I understand, we'll leave this place. Don't hurt my children, we'll get out of here. And this news was spread far and wide. But even with Lin becoming infamous in this way, they started up the orphanage in a new spot. But then we get a glimpse behind the curtain as we see that full stop, everything Mother Carmel has been doing has been raising these kids so that she can sell them. Mother Carmel is legitimately a child trafficker who sells these kids, and the reason she's been trying to protect them is not because she cares about them, but rather they are commodities. And Lin in particular is a precious one that she's trying to maintain so that she can sell her. And she's sold these children. She has these under-the-table deals with the Marines, with Cypherpole. There's talks about how these kids could grow into prominent roles there. And she's trying to sell Lin and raise up her value, and she says she's the most valuable item she's ever had. She could be huge. She could be a huge boon to the Navy. She could shield the Celestial Dragons, all of that, as she talks to these people who she's doing deals with. So crazy dark little twist here, as Oda describes her very aptly as an orphan seller. Also, a neat little detail here is that the orphans just hanging out sing Bink Sake, the best song in the One Piece universe. Anyways, it comes to Lin's 6th birthday, and everyone holds this party for her as they all celebrate, and everyone's laughing and smiling and happy, and they bring out this cake, this gigantic cake that says, "Happy birthday, Lin." And everyone says, "Eat up," and she goes, "Okay." And let me just read the narration as, oh god, this is so twisted. This is nasty stuff. Oda really pulled one over on me with this one. One day, Mother Carmel simply vanished, as we see Lin just eating this cake. And it happened on the very best birthday that Lin ever had. We see smiling faces, Lin stuffing her face. She was with her friends at the House of Lambs, kids who'd been through the same hardships, and her beloved, kind-hearted Mother Carmel. Surrounded by all those smiles and eating her delicious sweet birthday cake, Linlin found that she couldn't stop crying. What a wonderful day it was. She couldn't even see through her tears. And then we see her saying, "Yummy," but there are screams in the background. What a truly wonderful birthday. And we see that Linlin, after having finished the cake, says, "That was so good, I even chewed the table a bit. Thanks so much, guys. I'll never forget this day for the rest of my life." And she looks up, opens her eyes, and her mother's gone, her siblings are gone, everyone is gone. So she ate her family. She ate the mother who she thought loved her. She never found out that she was trying to sell her. That may be the smallest of silver linings, but regardless, Big Mom ate her family in this crazy, euphoric binge eat. And we see now that everything she's done since this moment, whether or not she realized what she did, whether or not deep down inside she realizes what she did, and the idea that Mother Carmel just abandoned her mysteriously is a bit of coping, a bit of repression and formulated memories to protect herself. Regardless, this destroyed her, fractured her mentality, and ever since then, this idea of all these sorts of different people eating at the same table, all these people from different walks of life and different cultures and whatever, coming together, this dream that she's had, this is to reenact this birthday party that went so badly wrong for her, because that was what she had experienced at this moment. All sorts of different kids from all different walks of life gathering together and having this wonderful time, this wonderful party. That is what she keeps trying to go back to, constantly. She flies into these rages, but the reason she wants these people that are giants, the reason that she wants all sorts of people, all these alliances from her kids, bringing everyone towards her, is because she keeps trying to make it back to this time, this sentimental time where she was happy. Why did you just vanish? Where did you go, Mother? And 63 years later, she cannot move past this. And we now have context for some stuff. The reason she has a sore spot with the Giants, because it was the one group that she doesn't have alliances with, because she was completely outlawed. She ruined Elbath, right? And she wants full control over her children because she doesn't want them to leave her. Just like she was left all that time ago. Another parallel with Luffy. Remember how Luffy says, "I want to make it so that no one goes away"? Very similar to Big Mom, but the complexion's totally different. Luffy would let his friends leave if they wanted to. He just doesn't want to lose them if they are all a family and they get forcibly taken from him. But Big Mom possesses her children, and she just has this fragmented mind. Big Mom cannot move on. This big family, these big parties. It was the happiest time of her life, but it was also the saddest and the most traumatic, and it broke her. And she tried to revisit it through these instances, these parties in the present, because one, it's happy, and two, it overwrites the trauma. She had this happy time, and it ended horribly. Now she's trying to have it again, but for it to end happily for her. But no matter how much she tries to overwrite this through all these parties in the present, she can never escape it. That trauma is deeply embedded, and the more she tries to run from it, the more it'll affect her. And Mother Carmel telling everyone to forgive her because she didn't really care about raising her as much as just making sure she survived. It was this negative factor on her mentality because it made Linlin, Big Mom, unable to control her impulses. And it's crazy because the intent is not bad. She wants to have everyone together, all these people from different races, to have a good time. But she handles it so poorly, so possessively, so toxically, toxically? I don't know if that's a word, because she cannot move on. Because she never learned how to be anything other than that. She is still, by all rights and purposes outside of age, a child. She is still that scared 6-year-old child. She throws parties, she doesn't want people to leave, she loves food, very much like Luffy, but complete opposites. Beautiful foils of one another. And the big difference here is that Luffy, when he experiences trauma, is able to move past it, thanks in large part to Jinbei and his crew, and the dream of meeting his crew again. But Big Mom is stuck in it. She has not moved past it. Who knows if she can? And so, this fractured mentality of Big Mom's is fascinating. It fills in all the gaps, it makes her so interesting. And yeah, it makes her one of the more layered and rich and engaging antagonists throughout the entire story. And she has to be, in terms of her mentality and its makeup and how fractured she is as a result of her trauma, she has to be one of the most interesting psychologies of any character in the story. Like, I think of interesting psychologies, I think of Doflamingo, I think of Hody Jones, and I think of Big Mom. There are other ones as well. Those are just the ones I thought of just now. Anyways, Streusen, the current chef, found her and raised her, and we now have the Big Mom pirates that we see today. Streusen being kind of similar to Treble for Doflamingo. That's a similar sort of role for Big Mom. And it turns out the island where the sheep's house was is now Whole Cake Island, trying to find her mother, trying to carry out her mother's wishes and whims, trying to relive that past. And it's chaos. Big Mom has retaken the advantage. They try to escape in the mirror, but Big Mom shatters it, and then Bej tells everyone to get inside him. Yes, that's what I said, don't laugh at it. As we see this gigantic spread of this castle that he creates. And there's this really cool moment as Chopper and Nami and Carrot are captured by some of Big Mom's children, but the Vinsmoke family saved them. This turnaround, this doesn't make them great people, but in terms of actions, it's very gratifying, it's very satisfying for them to do this. As we see this great spread, Germa 66, Judge, Reiju, all the brothers, all go to help out the Straw Hats. In the chaos, the Tamate box flies off, and Big Mom, seeing that Bej has betrayed her, which is one of the things she despises most, begins turning her attention towards him and the castle, as everyone has kind of taken siege inside it. Now, the next chapter, 870, they come up with some sort of escape plan to get out of there, and it's fine. I'm not going to dive in deep into that, but what I really want to draw attention to is Sanji having this face-to-face with his father. Or rather, with Judge, because he's not his true father. And Judge asks him, answer me one thing, Sanji, why did you save us? And Sanji says, because my father would be sad if I were still fixated on the childhood hatred from my past. He would be astonished that I had turned into such a small man, that I would laugh off the death of my own family. And I'll be damned if I lead a life where I can't stand tall and look him proudly in the eye. I ran away from Germa 13 years ago, and Vinsmoke Sanji died in the sea. So admit it, you are not my father, Vinsmoke Judge. And Judge, it's an interesting expression. I don't think what he's done is redeemable, at least not in this context. But regardless, the way that Sanji stands up to him here makes you think maybe he realizes that what he did was horrible. Maybe he realizes just a little bit. Maybe he respects Sanji for standing up for him, or up to him, rather, just a little bit. And he says, then you have my word that I will never approach you or the East Blue again after this. And he says that Germa will guard him, will guard Bej, will aid in this escape attempt, as a sort of way to repay. And Luffy offers to help them, but Judge says, I don't need help from a failure. And Sanji just goes, this is their way of repaying. This is their way of making amends, so just let them do it. And so the escape plan is carried out. Very interesting direction for Germa. It's one that I imagined they would land on, but the way it's come about I find very natural and organic and really well done. It doesn't excuse anything that's been done by Judge, but it does sort of elevate Sanji in his eyes, make him respect him more, and make him be faced with the sort of the reality of the horrific nature of his actions in a way that gives him pause. Through all of this, humorously, the Tamate box finally, through a bunch of mishandling and falls and whatever, explodes at the base of the castle. So the alliance of Bej and the Straw Hats and the big alliance all decide that, now they've escaped, they've done their thing, and now's the time to back off. Now's the time to go their separate ways. And so Bej sort of escapes off. The Straw Hats decide that they're going to go back to the Sunny. However, they assumed that the Big Mom pirates would have been completely decimated because of the castle toppling. However, Streusen transformed a part of the castle into cake, softening the fall and making it so that everything was okay. Big Mom eats this and then eventually begins craving a genuine wedding cake. So she begins on a new rampage. And oh boy, this is a rampage and a half. Now Katakuri, who seems to be, it's worth noting, who seems to be very, very tied to a duty, tied to being this very strong person, this very strong man, this example of, bound to duty, doing his job extremely well, extremely strong and fearsome, and obviously having a great obligation to his family, being strong, doing his duty, doing it for his family. He decides to search out the Straw Hats. However, Big Mom continues on her rampage, and Sparrow tells her that the Straw Hats have a cake. Now, in the meantime, a lot of her children, the Charlotte family, are wondering, like, this isn't good. Like, they don't actually have a cake. So what are we gonna do? And Pudding decides that she will make this cake, and it's all gearing up for what we know is gonna happen. Who can make a great cake that Big Mom can eat here? A cook. Now, the Straw Hats find King Bomb and begin escaping on him, but Big Mom quickly hunts them down, looking for this cake, screaming, "Cakey," which I heard annoyed a lot of people at how often you would hear it during the anime. Now, Pudding meets Chiffon and says, we need to create this cake. We need to make this cake and, in the end, use it to save Sanji and his friends. Sanji's kindness being rewarded here. His ability to see the beauty in her. Meanwhile, Big Mom is chasing them down. Nami is able to get Zeus, one of the clouds, onto her side, but the Sun Homie completely sets King Bomb on fire. This guy has been through the ringer. And I just want to say here, at this chapter, 875, our cover story is something I was mentioning earlier on about Bartholomew, Bart. Here we see him burning Shanks's flag on this place that has been occupied by him, or like, that is his territory. Remember when I said, what if Bart starts doing something in Luffy's name, or for Luffy, or whatever, that is a misunderstanding of who Luffy is and what he would stand for? Luffy would not want Shanks's flag to be burned in this way. I mean, I'm sure he eventually wants to fight him, if it comes to that, but burning his flag like this? I don't think so. And Bart is doing this, not actually knowing what Shanks stands for and his relationship with Luffy. So this is a really dark, misinterpretive twist on Bart's character, and I really am interested to see if Oda goes the distance with it, because I think it could be really, really cool. Back to the story, though. Nami does a great job in fending off Big Mom, using Zeus and her climate act and her knowledge of the weather and all that stuff. Chiffon agrees to help Pudding with the cake, as Pudding consistently flips back and forth between clearly wanting to help Sanji, but also having this sort of evil glint in her eye, that damn Sanji, but obviously caring for him. It's pretty entertaining. And Brook and Chopper reach the Sunny, but they realize that it's occupied by a lot of Big Mom's pirates. Sparrow's there, and they, especially Chopper, they gear up to defend it. Now, Pudding meets up with the rest of the Straw Hats and talks about this plan to make this cake, going back and forth between threatening and hating Sanji, apparently, and clearly being very tsundere, or yandere, some would say, and clearly having affection for him. And Sanji ultimately says, okay, that's a good plan. Let's do this. Let's make this cake to stop this rampage, because it doesn't seem like much is going to stop her outside of that. And it all works. It's very thematically fulfilling and makes sense. I love it. It's great for Sanji and Pudding. It's great for Sanji himself to be this sort of answer to it. And it makes sense. It makes sense. It's all very organic and fitting and fulfilling. And yeah, I love this development as we edge towards the climax and ending and finale of this arc. But there's still quite a bit to go. There's still like 25, 26 chapters, but, in the grand scheme of things, this is the last third or so of the arc, and this is the climax, so I was wondering how they were going to continue it on, and this is a really good way to do it. And Brook and Chopper continue to defend the Sunny. It's awesome from Brook and Chopper against all these forces, and Katakuri and Sparrow, and wondering if they should knock out and destroy these mirrors because of the mirror world stuff. It's very admirable from them as the rest of the crew try to make their way over to the Sunny and escape the territory. But ultimately, Brook and Chopper are subdued and stopped just as the Straw Hats make their way over to the Sunny. And then, in this epic scene, Luffy tries to fight off those who are on the ship as he confronts Katakuri. And we see when Luffy punches him, Luffy does this punch, this elastic punch with his Firehawk, or his Red Hawk, excuse me. Katakuri punches him in the exact same way. It's a sort of mirror image as both of their arms elongate. And these two seem to be foils to one another in this way, as they face off here. This was a precursor to the greatest fight in One Piece, Luffy versus Katakuri, but this was just a taster of it. And the idea that they mirrored one another in this way, Katakuri being this unblemished reflection of Luffy, much more polished it seems. Amazing hook for both of them, as Luffy hit this initial blow and tried to fend him off. Jinbei tells Luffy to fight Katakuri off so that they can set sail. Luffy says he's on it, but Katakuri has these mochi powers, and similar to sort of like Crocodile, when Luffy punches a hole through his face, he just bounces right back into it and reforms his face, and so he seems pretty damn impenetrable. But then, oh man, Pedro says something to Carrot here. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, a scene that shocked me, but like retroactively shocked me. He says, Carrot, try not to be startled by this sudden turn of events. I have a suspicion that Luffy and his friends are those whom our people and the Kozuki clan have waited for centuries, the ones who will guide us to the dawn of the world. Through all this chaos, he just says that to Carrot. Big Mom continues the rampage. Luffy and Katakuri are trading blows. And then in the midst of this all, after Pedro says that to Carrot, he attacks Sparrow, and he has a bunch of bombs underneath his jacket, strapped to his person. As we see that he said to Carrot, I had a feeling that this would be my final voyage. And he says, so long. And Carrot had said, what do you mean, Pedro? One day you will understand the true importance of keeping Luffy and his crew alive here so that their voyage can go on. Listen to me. You keep moving forward. As Carrot sees him light the bombs, light the dynamite or whatever this is on his person with his cigarette, and it blows up him and Sparrow. And Pedro sacrifices himself here for Luffy, for what he views, the person he views to be this new dawn, the dawn of this new age for the Kozuki clan, for the Mink tribe, that will snuff out the darkness in the world, the darkness on Wano, the darkness everywhere. Luffy and the Straw Hats are this new dawn. And I've talked about how I believe that this, in the next video, I will be talking in the Reverie about how I think this is a hint to why Wano will maybe be the most defining arc for Luffy as a character, and the dawn/sun imagery that's been building up. And I think Pedro encapsulates it here. Really, it's so shocking. It seems to come so suddenly and out of nowhere, out of left field, that he sacrifices himself like this. I was shocked. I was taken aback. But then you think about it more, and you think about all he did here, all he did during the arc for Luffy, knowing that his life was close to its end, imparting this knowledge onto Carrot as she tearfully screams and sees him disappear. It's shocking. I don't think you're meant to take it in completely at first glance. The manner of his death is a byproduct compared to its role in the grand scheme of things. And he talks about overthrowing the night, that Luffy will overthrow the night. The night is darkest before the dawn. And it makes me think, there are so many darknesses he could be talking about. World government rule, Emu, which we'll talk about in Reverie, Kaido, the Emperors, this age. I don't know, but it could be so many things. And maybe all of them. It reminds me of Fishman Island, and how Luffy will be this salvation, this parallel with Joy Boy. Pedro is sort of the spearhead for connecting that to Whole Cake Island here, and further. And we see a flashback with Sparrow and Pedro all that time ago, when they first got this sentence, quote-unquote, from Big Mom. And we see that Pedro talks about his pirates, his crew being named the Nox Pirates, after night, and he says that there's no night that doesn't end in a surprise. To me, Nox is synonymous with the moment before the dawn. So night, the Nox Pirates, are this sort of ironic hope for the deepest part of the night being right before a new sun rising. This element of hope. I love that for him. It ties in directly with how he is this spearhead of hope. But throughout all of this, we see that when he was younger, a young pirate, he would speak to Roger and Odin, and he said that he wanted to join them. To which they said, hold on, kid, you're not ready for this yet. Roger said, I don't have much time left, so listen up, everyone has their moment to shine. And he reflects on that, and he reflects when Roger died. And this is his moment to shine. And I think it is a monumental moment, one that'll echo throughout history, and be a turning point as he sacrificed himself for this new dawn, for Luffy to keep moving forward. And he thinks, if I can lay the foundations for the dawning of the world that the men I look up to await, I'll be happy. I'm certain I have enough time for that. He says this to Sparrow, and then we see the explosion once again. And of course, Carrot and Luffy and Brook are all grieving for Pedro, but notably, Katakuri does the same for brother Sparrow, and Carrot is inconsolable, trying to throw herself off the deck, going after him. Nami has to stop her. And in this difficult moment, Luffy shows his leadership by saying, if we waste this moment, we throw his sacrifice away. We need to set sail. And this sacrifice allows the Straw Hats to be able to set sail. And Carrot is just enraged, trying to fight Katakuri, completely outmatched, of course, but just thinking about how she's lost such a valuable part of her life in Pedro. And what's interesting here is Luffy tries to go in and save her, and he says, I'm the captain of this ship, to Katakuri, kind of, put your attention to me. And Katakuri says in response, only if you have the ability to throw me off. It isn't a dismissal of what he says, it is a, okay, if you are, show your power, show me. It is something that's very notable and very key to his character, and that is, he respects strength. He will acknowledge Luffy as a captain if Luffy shows adequate strength for it. He doesn't laugh him off. So we're slowly building up this litany of elements that we can apply to Katakuri. He has this honor. He has these principles. He respects strength. He admires strength, even. He has this duty, this obligation to his family, whom he loves very much. He seems to be blemish-free, and all these things are adding up. But Big Mom continues her rampage, starts eating the ship. Luffy starts fighting Katakuri to allow the rest of the Straw Hats to get out of there. Sparrow is shown to be alive after this, and Luffy says to all of them, Jinbei, Brook, Chopper, Carrot, Nami, I will be back. Hold things down without me. This is a promise of his. He says that he will be back, and so they need to trust him. He is a man of his word. He will never break his promise. And they do a coup de bow. Jinbei carries it out, and the Sunny flies out of there. And in one of the rawest things in One Piece, full stop, Luffy joins Katakuri in Mirror World. They face off to one another, and in order to protect the Straw Hat, the crew, to keep Katakuri here, but also caging himself here, he breaks the mirror behind him, and makes it so that they're gonna fight here. Man to man, fist to fist, with nowhere to escape, nothing to do except face one another, and do battle. Shonen as hell, with the backdrop of Pedro's sacrifice, being the night that will bring forth a dawn that he will not see himself, but having faith in the next generation, having faith in the likes of Carrot, to bring forth Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats, and to help them bring forth the dawn. Amazing stuff. This conclusion to Whole Cake Island is phenomenal. Now, from this point, there is immense shock in response to Pedro's death. We have Brook, who struck up quite a partnership with Pedro throughout the first couple of acts of Whole Cake Island, who in the rain seems to be in shock that he's gone. He laments their weakness as Chopper cries and Carrot cries, and Nami just looks completely forlorn and broken. And Jinbei, in something that is reminiscent of Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, says that we cannot lose control. We have to stay focused. As difficult as it is, we have to focus on the task ahead. And Brook calls him cruel, calls him kind of heartless for focusing on this, but what he says is that we cannot let our guard down now. That shoreline was a place of certain death. He understood what it represented and was determined to sacrifice himself whenever necessary, and with this act, Pedro achieved victory. The enemy has suffered an unprecedented loss because of what Pedro did. Don't you hear Pedro's voice in your ears? Onwards. Just what a beautiful thing to say, to not dismiss the sentiment of what Pedro did, but also keep moving forwards, because you gotta have bigger picture thinking in this moment. And this is why Jinbei is essential. There is no one in the Straw Hats who have this sort of a maturity, experience, wisdom, bigger picture thinking without losing sight of the sentiment of these things. Because Jinbei is a sentimental, emotional person, but he also is able to act in service of the overall grand goal, and he's able to act in the way that Pedro would have wanted them to act. So he just goes, we cannot let our guard down. Don't you hear Pedro saying this to us? Let's move. And he gets everyone into gear. And he has this immense role. He has this role that is essential for the Straw Hats at this point in the journey. Late game, 900 plus chapters in, 800, whatever, almost 900 chapters in. This is the exact sort of person that Luffy's crew would be delighted to have and are lucky to have. But then we cut back to Katakuri versus Luffy as the fight has begun, and we see that, like I said, Katakuri seems to be this unblemished, superior mirror reflection of Luffy, appropriately enough. They are alike in so many ways in terms of this fight, in terms of this combat, and in terms of a couple of other things as well, in terms of their character. But, sorry, I just said in terms like 7 times in 10 seconds. Anyways, in this fight, it very much seems like he has the upper hand. He is Luffy, but better. It's very beautifully presented. The fight flows super well. There are lots of panels with no dialogue as it speaks for itself, and Luffy gets in there with an elephant gun, but Katakuri's is just 3 times bigger than it. 3 or 4 times bigger. It is just a gigantic answer to what Luffy does, and it is better. So you just wonder, how is Luffy gonna defeat this enemy? How is Luffy gonna defeat this adversary who seems to be able to do exactly what he does, but just faster, stronger? It is immense setup for the rest of this fight. Now, throughout all of this, Pudding, Chiffon, Sanji, they're all getting everything together, gathering a staff, getting the resources they need to put this cake together. And Pudding says to these people, this cake is of utmost importance to the survival of this nation. She really takes leadership, takes ownership, and has a bunch of agency here, and is such a very powerful figure here. And it really, it's just she has such a distinct arc, almost more than any other character in Whole Cake Island aside from like Sanji. It's hard to find a character in Whole Cake Island in this arc that has a more comprehensive, complete character arc than Pudding, and it really is nailed in here. Now, during Luffy and Katakuri's fight, Brûlée wakes up and is able to witness her brother, whom she really seems to love, just dismantling Luffy. Now, Luffy then grabs a shard and contacts Jinbei and the rest of the crew and says, destroy every mirror on the ship so that you guys won't be at risk. Luffy has locked himself with Katakuri, and he promised to come back, and he still intends to, but he's going to have to take a roundabout way for the safety of the crew, just so that they won't be vulnerable. Throughout all this, there is a great emphasis as well on Katakuri saying, you know, don't you touch my brothers and sisters. Stay away from them. Very similar to how Luffy thinks about his crew, because Luffy is trying to grab the mirrors from some of Katakuri's brothers and sisters. But as the crew are trying to go to break the mirrors, a huge tidal wave bears down on them. Beautifully presented, cataclysmic. But again, this is Jinbei's time to shine, and he's able to navigate through the wave. He says, we've got a good ship, a good navigator, and with a good helmsman, this craft is unbeatable, invincible. And so he's able to navigate, or maneuver rather, around this wave and come out of it, not unscathed, but safe. And there's a great moment as Nami tells them to break the mirrors, and the crew goes, but how will he get back if we do that? And she just thinks of Luffy's promise and his will. And she goes, that's a captain's order, now hurry. Wonderful moment from Nami, and kind of something you'd imagine Zoro would do, but she herself does it in such a difficult moment. But essentially, Nami gets a hold of this last shard, talks to Luffy, tells him the plan about Sanji and the cake and Pudding, and to meet at Cacao Island 10 hours later. This really insinuates that this is going to be a dragged-out fight for Luffy and Katakuri, but that's where they promise to meet. And Luffy, in the midst of being beaten up by Katakuri, replies with a, come back soon, you guys. This'll be over quick, and I'm going to get bored just waiting around. And they say, yeah, really full of confidence and empowered by what he says, as he puts on this brave smile for them. And he goes, see you soon. And the rest of the Straw Hats are celebrating, and they're like, oh, Luffy, yes! But you can see this side glance from Jinbei, who can tell that Luffy is putting on a brave face. I can't understate, or overstate rather, how important Jinbei's role is. For understanding deeply who Luffy is, for being wise and mature and experienced, and and learned, and for offering us this sort of perspective. Zoro's the only other one, I think, who would have had a chance to understand what Luffy's really going through in this moment. But even he might have been fooled, but Jinbei isn't. And I think it's really important that he's able to understand that and help Luffy bear the burden as a result of it. Meanwhile, back with Katakuri, he's predicting the future as he says, "You're about to say, 'I don't intend to die here. Shall I take that to be your last will and testament?' And Luffy says, 'I don't intend to die here.'" There's some great things done with the dialogue here. But Katakuri says that no one expects to die when they do. Death is unexpected, or no one wants to die when they do. No one decides. Interesting, given his fixation on fate. And Brule in the back is just going, "You don't get it. Brother Katakuri is undefeated, superhuman. He is the epitome, the symbol of strength." And this ties in with the idea that's been throughout One Piece of the idea of the symbol, of people who, for one reason or another, have to take up the mantle to be something other than just a regular, relatable human. Whitebeard is the foremost example of that in the story, of someone who had to be more than a human, who couldn't show vulnerability because it was in service of this grander goal that he had, because he had to inspire others. Katakuri is a bit different here. He takes up the mantle to be superhuman and unblemished, but for reasons that are tied more to deception and a duty that is thrust upon him and self-inflicted, rather than in service of something that is super beneficial in the long run. Whitebeard sacrificed himself and would never, ever change what he did, but Katakuri hid himself. But we'll get into that in a bit. The point is, he is the masterpiece, the example of the Charlotte family. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats make their way over to Cacao Island because they have to meet Luffy there eventually, and they need to escape. And Germa are continuing to take out the enemy in service of repaying Sanji and the Straw Hats and everyone else. And they intend to continue to help the Straw Hats as they hear where they're headed, and they intend to go there. But it's worth noting that as the fight continues between Luffy and Katakuri, there begins to be this burgeoning respect for one another. Luffy finds it really annoying that Katakuri knows what he's going to do. It's a very difficult fight, and he says this out loud, and Katakuri goes, "I've never fought someone who's been able to avoid my attacks so much." So they're beginning to respect one another, to think of one another as very worthy opponents, kindred spirits, perhaps. Katakuri says a line that I really love, which is, "I refuse to underestimate you." And he uses Mochi to kind of bury Luffy, to almost bury him alive. And he says, "I'm sorry to end the fight this way, but I'm missing my afternoon merienda, afternoon snack." And he has these cooks who are like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We were prepared at the same time as always. For a perfectionist such as yourself, failing to enjoy the daily merienda at the proper time must be very upsetting. Okay, well, here's your meal." And so Katakuri, at this moment, with Luffy seemingly defeated, barricades himself into this this house, or this room? I think it's a house. And with no one around, he removes the sort of shawl or whatever it was that covered his neck and mouth, and begins eating, feasting on these donuts. And he has this monstrous, seemingly monstrous mouth, this gigantic mouth with spiky, jagged teeth that very much betray the image of perfection, of stoic perfection that he has, the symbol that he is. It is in complete contrast with what he represents, and you can immediately tell that he's been hiding that. He's been hiding this aspect of himself that he may see as ugly, or others may see as ugly, or unconventional, or monstrous, very similar to Pudding in her third eye. And you very much see that this is his reprieve. This is where he feels most free, where he's able to completely be himself, and be vulnerable, and be real and raw and honest, because every other moment, he is not able to do that. He has to maintain this image for the sake of his family, for his duty, for his siblings, in service of all of that. And I haven't mentioned this, but there's a big deal of the fact that Katakuri never lays down on his back. He's a man who looks down on the earth, but here he is laying on his back, eating this donut. He himself never allows himself to fall down, always maintaining this image of standing above everything else. Not because he feels he needs to, or it's his birthright, or anything like Doflamingo does in terms of verticality. Not because it is beneficial to him, necessarily, or his overall grand goal in a way that is loyal to who he is in the way that Whitebeard is, but because he's living a lie. He cannot be vulnerable. Not because he doesn't want to be vulnerable, but he can't. And the thing is, Luffy bursts in at this moment and sees this. He's the only one to see this. And immediately, this offers this level of intimacy between these two characters, that Luffy sees him for who he truly is. And the cooks who made his lunch for him, they see this, and he seems to kill them. He at least brutally injures them. But him and Luffy continue to fight, and but with a little bit of a chink in his armor now that Luffy understands him more and sees that he is not blemish-free, superhuman. He is just a human, a guy. And he notices something about his powers and says that he can maneuver a little bit and understand his weakness, and he thinks he'll be able to win with this knowledge. And Katakuri grows and spirals more and more, gets more and more enraged as he sees that Luffy is understanding that he is vulnerable, that he isn't human, that the facade has faded away. But this is the first step from this sort of rage and a little bit of a denial. But that's the first step to ultimately accepting and embracing who he is, which Luffy helps him to do through combat. One of my favorite tropes. I don't inherently love any tropes simply for what they are, but understanding through combat, which is a very shonen thing, is one of my favorites. And Luffy and Katakuri, their fight is an encapsulation of that. Now, I already talked about Pound and his connection with Chiffon and his grandson, and that ephemeral nature of how his last interactions or sights of that grandson and his connection to family and all of that. So I won't mention it, but I won't repeat myself, but I just want to make note that that happens roughly here. And during this conflict on Cacao Island, as Chiffon and Pudding and Bej and Sanji, they're all working together to put this cake together and ultimately escaping. So it happens around here. Meanwhile, Luffy and Katakuri continue to fight. Luffy seems to have the momentum, but Katakuri steadies himself. Praline as well assists the Straw Hats in getting making their escape. Now Sanji and Pudding and Chiffon, they make the base of the cake. Like the cake's pretty much finished, so they then head out to bring it to Big Mom. Meanwhile, Luffy, who has been in Gear 4 this whole time, runs out of time on it, sort of takes Brûlé captive, exits through a mirror, and ends up on Nuts Island, where Big Mom happens to be, and Big Mom notices him and goes after him. As Sanji and them and everyone else begins to make their getaway, Bej kind of has his hands tied behind his back in order to save his son and wife, and this is where Pound essentially gets no recognition but saves them, and gets that glimpse of Pez, and is happy for that fleeting moment. Very beautiful stuff. While at the same time, Big Mom has moved past Luffy and sees the Sunny and begins catching up to it, going, "Gimme that cake," as she has been doing for a while and continues to do for a while. Now, throughout this time, Luffy has been taking the time to think about a strategy to counteract what Katakuri has been doing. Very cerebral. Not necessarily something you'd associate with Luffy earlier in the story, but this shows his maturity and things that he's learned from Jinbei and Rayleigh and just his years of experience and what he's learned. So I like that. But he goes back into the mirror world to face off against Katakuri. He says he'll defeat him and the fight begins once again. But what I love about this is Katakuri says to him, "Did you return because you want to go out fighting rather than as a coward? Or did you come to plead, realizing that I'm just superior to you?" And Luffy says, "I came back to beat you." And Katakuri says that wasn't an option that I gave you. So what I love about that is it's kind of an encapsulation of who Luffy is. When there seems to be a bunch of options that none of which are desirable to him, he will punch his way through, find a third option, and continue along that direction. And that is what he does here. Now, Big Mom and her fleet and her soldiers have caught up to the Thousand Sunny. Big Mom, who is noticeably thinner after her rage, which continues. And then Carrot, in one of the highlights of this entire arc, in a move that shocked me. Especially for a Carrot lover like myself, I adored this. Carrot says, "Guys, let me try this. I think I can help." No doubt getting inspiration from Pedro and what he's done to do what she can to not only save her friends, but maintain the dawn that will bring an end to this night. And noticeably, she does this in the full moon. when the night is at its deepest, very cohesive with Pedro. So she sees that tonight is a full moon. And Jinbei goes, "You're gonna turn into Sulong?" I had no idea what that even meant, but then we see Carrot look up at the moon and internally thinking, "I'll fight to make up for you, Pedro." And she slowly transforms into this sort of what seems monstrous in the moment, because her nails grow, she screams, she roars, and she is this, she takes the form of this sort of were-rabbit creature, it seems. But then everything calms down and you see her form, and it is quite beautiful. Flowing hair, beautiful dark eyes, very graceful, very elegant. It's a beautiful creature, it's a beautiful form. And she is wielding this to protect. And everyone is in awe and shocked, and Jinbei kind of echoes what I thought. As he goes, "What a wondrous sight," as we see her silhouetted against the moon. And this is an ace up her sleeve that she had been talking about prior to this, that Pedro had been talking about prior to this. And this is the true form of the minx, it's stated, as she goes off and fights off all comers in this incredible sequence where she is just fighting off everyone, defeating everyone. But very graceful while doing it, very elegant. She grabs the wheel of an opposing ship and does her very Carrot-esque giggle after she does it. So she's still, it's not like she's lost control or all sense of who she is. She's just taken on a different form to this end. And again, this sort of coalesces with the idea of, that duality, those masks. Not everything is as it seems. Carrot had this whole other side to her. And I love the substance it adds to her character, enacting this in Pedro's stead, but using this to protect. And the way she thematically represents the moon through her Sulong form, just like Pedro did, embracing the darkest part of the night because it welcomes forth the dawn. Beautiful stuff, amazing stuff, I loved it. And it really makes me excited for what Carrot's going to do in the future. Now we get to something very essential, where Beige says that in the cake they have to put explosives or poison so that it will, kill or at the very least seriously wound Big Mom so that they can properly make their escape, that they can assure their safety. Sanji, however, will not compromise his principles. Food is not meant for that. He thinks that its deliciousness, its sweetness will be enough to ensure that Big Mom is satiated and fine and stops her rampage. And also, it just completely contradicts his idea of what food is, and it is pretty much sacrilege. Something I've always loved about Sanji is how hardcore he adheres to his principles, and this is a great example of that. It is almost, Beige would say that it is self-sacrificial to have such an adherence to your principles and your ideals. But Sanji doesn't care about that. And Beige is convinced, more or less, after he tastes the cake, and so that ends up resolving itself pretty quickly. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting sort of conflict there that sheds some light on Beige and his pragmatism, and then his ability to be swayed, and Sanji. Big Mom continues summoning her homies after Carrot has to stop her attack because the Sulong form only works for a short amount of time, and the Straw Hats then take her in and are taking care of her. But she has done an amazing job in weakening Big Mom's forces and the other fleets, and Jinbei says that in the face of Big Mom being this unrelenting, we may need to abandon ship. The fight with the Straw Hats and Big Mom continues. I don't have a ton to say about it, aside from the fact that Nami is kind of attractively sadistic towards Zeus throughout all of it as she wields it. But no, it's good stuff, I just don't have a ton to say about it. And this conflict continues, and finally Sanji finishes the cake properly. The decorations, the icing, everything is done. Now in the meantime, back with Luffy and Katakuri, one of Katakuri's siblings' sisters, Flampe, I called her Flamp, but I think it's Flampe, is introduced. And her function is essentially to be an encapsulation of the idea of admiring Katakuri for the false mask, rather than the person he is, and being shallow in that way. She wants Katakuri to love her because he is this symbol and this personification of this shallow strength and what one of these Charlotte siblings is supposed to be. And she is here to support him, quote unquote. As the fight continues with Luffy and Katakuri, she is now a spectator and going for him and wants to essentially help him in some way so that he will acknowledge her because she wants to be acknowledged by him. And as Katakuri and Luffy continue to fight, there's this brilliant quote from Katakuri as he says, "Why doesn't the light go out?" And that is Luffy, isn't it? He is this light that refuses to go out. It dims sometimes when he suffers the most, but with the support of others, and his just persevering, insane strength of will, it never goes out. Why won't the light go out in those eyes? Because he's Luffy. And Katakuri says to him as he kicks him down, he goes, I don't understand you. Even falling to the ground is a source of shame. But what Katakuri doesn't realize is the problem is not vulnerability. Falling to the ground is not shame. Not getting back up is a source of shame. Not persevering after you find yourself facing your first hurdle, after you face your first failure. That happens to everyone. It's impossible not to be vulnerable. Everyone is. Everyone fails. It is not a source of shame to fail. It is a source of shame to not learn from it, grow from it, and get back up again. And he's so strong, so unbending, but at the same time he is a little bit brittle because he refuses to acknowledge that he is a human being who has vulnerabilities. He refuses to embody them, and he sees futility in this. He says, I can read your attacks, so why do you pursue? Why do you persist? But then he realizes that Luffy, this heaven-sent boy who seems to have this cosmic luck, is beginning to tap into the idea, the ability to see the future, just like he can, just a little bit through his haki, and it's beautiful. It makes complete sense that this boy who seems to be touched by the heavens, touched by fate, fated to be this pivotal figure, maybe this reincarnation of Joy Boy, maybe the Dawn, a hero to many, a villain to some, an inspiration to countless. The fact that he is able to see the future in these points, infrequently, but at points, just like Katakuri, it's no coincidence thematically. And at the same time as Luffy talks to Katakuri and as Sanji talks to Pudding, they both say, I need to do this, their respective tasks, because they believe in me. Talking about their friends, their crew, those they want to protect. Beautiful synchronicity as both of them follow their own respective tasks as we head into the final bit of this arc. Also, something that I'm realizing and I didn't talk about during the stuff with Pedro and Carrot is that the moonlight, the moon, is a reflection of the sun. So, while it may seem like the night is so deep and so far from the dawn, the idea that of the full moon being so close to the dawn and the sun is very, very apt. It's very, very true. It's honest, and it makes sense with regards to Carrot and Pedro and what they represent, and them being an embodiment of the night and the moon bringing forth the dawn. So, the moonlight being a reflection of the sun is a really, really cool thematic, symbolic motif here that works. It just works beautifully for Pedro and especially Carrot in this regard. And what I love about this synchronicity and Luffy and Sanji both saying that they believe in me, they're essentially saying that I will beat you. They think I'll beat you, or they think I'll finish the cake and stop Big Mom. And this will happen because they believe in me. So there's this element of them being able to succeed through belief. Belief in friends, connections with others, is essentially what fuels and empowers others to carry out their respective goals and succeed. So it's almost like fate is perpetuated by shonen power of friendship nakama stuff, which I love. It's cheesy, but it's also peak. It's a sort of compatibilism. Belief in fate. Belief perpetuates fate. It doesn't disregard agency or perseverance or any of that, but because of the belief that others have in you and who you are and your ability to persevere, you can carry out that fate. So Sanji reunites with the rest of the Straw Hats as they get their cake ready for Big Mom. And there's this awful moment where he says, where's Pedro and Carrot? And the Straw Hats don't really know what to do, and Brook thinks on his feet and he goes, they're both sleeping. They're both sleeping. I guess now's not the time. It's a tough situation, and I think Brook does well on his feet there. They continue to be pursued by all sorts from the fleet. However, as this all happens, they head to Cacao Island because they're going to meet Luffy there. They're going to feed the cake to Big Mom. Both goals here coalesce. Now, all the mirrors on the island are destroyed except for one because they want to ambush Luffy should he escape. And all these people, Oven, leading them, are just gathered around this mirror. This is on Cacao Island, so it's all heating up and all leading there. But meanwhile, during the fight with Luffy and Katakuri uses this spear, or this trident almost, and deals this devastating blow that just completely skewers Luffy's side. And a chunk of his flesh is just taken out, and it looks devastating, as Flampe giggles. And this is where the Luffy-Katakuri fight really begins to ascend. I had been thoroughly enjoying it all this time. I'm like, this is really engaging, this is awesome, the dynamic's really cool character work building up for Katakuri, but it hadn't really clicked. This was where it clicked for me. Chapter 893 and the things that ensued after it, but this is where it all clicked and all made sense, and I fell in love with Katakuri and this fight. Because what is actually going on here is Flampe is shooting these numbing needles at Luffy, making him lose focus. And because Katakuri is getting enraged at this, Katakuri, who looks at Luffy and is gaining respect for him as the fight goes on and on and on, he gets very upset that Luffy loses his focus because he wants to fight him at his greatest, at his strongest. He has this sense of honor for fighting a strong opponent and this joy that he feels through fighting a strong opponent, just like Luffy does. And so he wants him at his best, very shonen. And he can't understand why Luffy consistently seems to be losing focus or slipping or whatever, not actually realizing exactly why Luffy is doing that until he sees it. He understands that Flampe is causing him to lose focus and to slip because she's shooting these needles at him. And he realizes that when I gouged his belly, it was due to that. It wasn't because he lost focus or fell or slipped, or because I actually did it through my own strength, or he actually had his own weakness. It was due to this external third party. And he says, do you really think that I want to win that way? Which reminds me a lot of how Luffy did not interfere with Zoro's fight with Mihawk, all the way back in Baratie, for example. But with regards to Katakuri right here, he does not want to win. It is not a victory for him if he doesn't do it through his own strength, him and him alone. That is a disgrace to him. And so Flampe thinks that Katakuri is going to admire her and thank her for her actions, and she'll be loved by him. But it's entirely the opposite. As she goes to embrace him, he impales himself in the exact spot where Luffy suffered that wound. And Luffy watches him do this, realizing, and Katakuri goes, when two men are fighting, the last thing I need is some half-hearted assistance, screaming at her, taking off his shawl or whatever it is, and showing his mouth as he screams at her. And through combat with Luffy, realizing that he doesn't really much care if he exposes himself, exposes his imperfections, because that is who he is. And at this height of human experience, in this moment where these two are just fighting, fists at the ready, taking each other on with all that they have, souls on the line, dancing with the devil, both of them. The last thing he wants is help, half-hearted assistance, as he says, and the last thing he cares about is this artificial image and symbol that he's trying to maintain that is not loyal to himself at all. Through these bouts with Luffy, he realizes that he can embrace himself. And he says, if you're going to laugh at that idiot, then laugh at me too. And she realizes his face, she's repulsed by it, she calls him a monster, a curse, people laugh at him, but he doesn't give a shit. All he cares about is fighting Luffy properly, honorably. And he thinks back really quickly, just really briefly, to when people would make fun of him for having this as a kid. And everyone making fun of him, but it doesn't matter. As he talks to Luffy and he goes, sorry about this, I was sloppy, I failed to notice that needle. And Luffy says there's no such thing as fighting dirty in a battle between pirates. It was my fault for not being able to dodge it. And Katakuri says, I've had enough of this peanut gallery. They won't be able to stand after this anyway, as they get ready again. And both Luffy and Katakuri knock everyone else out with their Conqueror's Haki. Both of them together. And on the same level, on equal standing. Katakuri says, I no longer assume that you are inferior to me. And Luffy says, that's great, thanks, but I'm still gonna win. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. And Katakuri at this moment takes off his shirt to reveal his tattoo. And there's great symbolism there, which we'll get into. I think I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk about when the fight's done. But, man, there is so much here. This is a beautiful dynamic between these two. A lot of which I've already talked about, Katakuri and embracing his true self and how Luffy taught him to do that. But there's a bunch of little notes I want to talk about at the conclusion of this fight. Now, at this moment, Sanji and Pudding are on their way to try to save Luffy. As Luffy thinks back to Rayleigh and all that he's learned, who did mention that there is a chance of some people being able to see into the future. And so Luffy taps into that, remembering what he told him to fight toe-to-toe with Katakuri. Big Mom, getting skinnier and skinnier, starved, continues to pursue them, looking for this cake. The Straw Hats make their way continuously. Sanji, like I said, wants to go and save their captain. Everyone waits at Cacao Island around that mirror. Katakuri screams at Luffy, "Is that all you got?" And Luffy is straight up and saying that, "No, I've got more." And there's a great staggering of the conversations as Katakuri envisions what Luffy's going to say. But Luffy activates Snake Man, Gear 4 Snake Man. And actually, I think I'm going to get into the little bits of symbolism and things that I want to talk about Katakuri here before we conclude it, because this is sort of right before the defining moment of the fight for me. So basically, there are people in One Piece who embody truth and honesty and striving for your ideals and striving for what you want in life. And there are always going to be, at times, a majority of people who laugh at you for that. And someone in my chat brought this up. Flampe, laughing at Katakuri, laughing at Luffy, is kind of playing an abstract version of the crowd in the bar in Jaya, laughing at these people for having dreams. There's always going to be people like that throughout your life, no matter what you do. And it's up to you whether you listen to them or just dismiss it. And that is what Luffy and Katakuri do here. There is that nature of the pride and the beauty is in not falling down, but getting up after you do, which I already talked about, which is a very important nuance, because Luffy himself fell down numerous times, and Katakuri looks at him as this embodiment of a worthy opponent, of someone to respect. But Luffy has fallen down numerous times, so Katakuri realizes that there is a beauty in doing that, in getting back up again. And in a lot of ways like this, Katakuri embodies the spirit of One Piece. Like I said, very similar to Zoro and Mihawk, as these two kindred spirits go at it. Mochi versus Rubber. Now, the nuance here is really awesome. Mochi and Rubber, very similar in how they stretch and can be elastic and whatever, but Rubber always bounces back, just as Luffy always keeps getting up, whereas Mochi stays in the form it is in, just like Katakuri was formed by his past experiences. This is pointed out to me in chat too. This is genius. And this shows the dynamic between the two of them. Katakuri, formed by what he's learned throughout life to take up this artificial mantle and wear this mask. Luffy, however, always bounces back, and he teaches him that it's okay to be vulnerable, to be yourself, to embrace who you are despite flaws, and despite those experiences that have shaped you. Now they continue to shape Katakuri, but in the sense that I need to be fake, I need to be false, I need to uphold this honor and this duty, but rather I need to be myself, because I was like this, and that is not how I want to live. So it still forms him, just through a different way, because he's been impacted by Luffy. Also, there's a cool little detail with their bounties, because, okay, let me see if I'm getting this right. Gomu is 56, and Katakuri had a $1.57 billion bounty, showing that externally, outwardly, Katakuri seems to be superior to Luffy, a superior version of Luffy, but in what truly matters internally, deeper, Luffy taught him a lesson here, and Katakuri will never forget it for the rest of his life. And what I love about this is, that's all I'm going to say for now. I'll say the rest in a few minutes, but so much of this is subtext and symbolism. And that is very different from a lot of One Piece fights. There is subtext, but a lot of Doflamingo is front-loaded and told to us, and very blunt. And that's great. I love how it's done with Doflamingo. But when Katakuri is done in this way that is so understated, so minimalistic, where you really gotta reflect and think and challenge yourself, it's such a thrilling thing to come up with these connections and understand how he ties into the grand story of One Piece in such a beautiful way. Actually, I'll talk about a few other observations. The way Katakuri and Sanji, arguably the two biggest figures of Whole Cake Island, are reflective of their family life and family experiences. Sanji, and they foil one another, because Sanji, the burden on him was to be perfect. He needed to be perfect. He needed to be unblemished. He needed to be strong in every way. He was unable to do that. Katakuri needed to do that as well, but he was able to do it. But ultimately, both find meaning in not having to uphold to that standard, or having to reach that standard, and being true to themselves. And Luffy shows both of them. Obviously, Sanji gets it through Zeph as well, through his mother as well. But Luffy is a big turning point for Sanji, and is the turning point for Katakuri, in showing both of them that he doesn't look down on them for who they are. In fact, they should embrace it. They are perfect as they are. He fully respects them for who they are. He doesn't look down on them. He thinks their weaknesses are beautiful and key to who they are. Luffy, this embodiment of freedom, and tied to freedom is being true to yourself and true to who you are, blemishes and all. It's a very empowering message for both Sanji and Katakuri here during this fight. And Katakuri, in this beautiful, beautiful twist compared to other One Piece villains or antagonists, respects him, is very honest and earnest, and grows this respect for him throughout, and just challenges him. Gets upset when he doesn't think Luffy is being the best he can be, but not because he's belittling him, but because he has the best expectations for him. And now with his tattoo, this was said to me in chat as well. The whole time with his clothes on, we only see part of his tattoo, which looks like prison bars, perhaps symbolizing how his persona and image acts as a prison for him, and cages him. However, he takes off his jacket and scarf, and we see that that was only part of the tattoo. The whole of it is a wing, a symbol of freedom. When he sheds the image of hiding his mouth, hiding who he is, being the perfect symbol of a man, when he sheds that, we see the wing. And that's when he's free. It's perfect synchronicity. Guys, this is genius. This is the best fight in the series. I don't expect any fight to top this in One Piece, because that's how great it is. That's how amazing it is. I'm not saying it's impossible, but Wano, if something in Wano is going to top this, they've got their work cut out. And then when you think of them in a dynamic with one another, Luffy and Katakuri has this duty that he has to carry out for his family, to be this false artificial self, whereas Luffy is encouraged by his family to be completely himself. They follow him because he is so unfiltered, raw, unadulterated Luffy. And Luffy has these dreams that push him onwards, whereas Katakuri was not really pushed by any dreams, which led to it being self-detrimental. But maybe now that can change. Dreams bring forth clarity, a sense of identity, a sense of self. Earlier in the fight, there was a moment where Katakuri headbutted the ground and refused to fall on his back, but it's total contrast with later in the fight. This is ultimately a celebration of humanity, flaws, a celebration of self, and embracing who you are, flaws and all. Blemishes, quote-unquote, and all. Things that some other people might think of as repulsive or monstrous or weird or strange, but there's no need to pay attention to that. That's just noise. That's just riffraff. What really matters is those who will understand you, and there will be those to understand you, and that's all you need. You just need just one person, one kind person. No one is a perfect ideal in this series, not even Whitebeard. Not even Roger, not Katakuri, not Luffy, not anyone. No one is perfect. And I love that. That's such a beautiful, self-affirming message from Oda. And it really ties together the theme of family. Big Mom being tied to her past because of her family. Sanji's trauma. Katakuri's duty. And I always thought that, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I just want to get this out here. Because of what Pudding went through, and because of Brûlé, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I always felt that after this fight, most of his siblings would be repulsed by him, but I feel like Pudding and Brûlé are the two siblings that I think have a chance of understanding Katakuri, and I hope they find him after this. I hope they find him, I hope they embrace him. I think it's clear that Brûlé will, but I hope Pudding finds him too. Anyways, I've been talking for far too long. The fight continues. It is just shonen, pure shonen greatness, spreads out of everywhere. Just the fight continues. By the way, the anime version of this is incredible. Incredible, I saw it. Fantastic stuff. And very little words throughout all of this. Incredibly raw images of a demonic Katakuri. Demonic and antagonistic, but not villainous, just adversarial. And Luffy just gets to a point where he just starts saying everything he's thinking, just because it feels good. These two are just at the precipice of the human experience. They continue to fight, just keep fighting, saying that this is the end for one another, and there's this final spread where they both charge at one another, screaming. Amazing stuff. You know the spread I'm talking about. End of 895. No words for this. It's just pure greatness. Ultimately, as this is happening, Pudding and Sanji sneak into Cacao Island. And, she has her whole back and forth element to her personality and character, and she ultimately cries at having to leave this person who is so self-affirming to her, so kind to her, just as kind of Luffy was to Katakuri. And your heart goes out to her, this person who was so hurt all her life, not a bad person, just a hurt person, who learned she had to act this way, as she has to leave the one person who really saw the beauty in her and embraced her for who she was. And she says she has one last request for him. And it cuts there as we get to the end of the Luffy-Katakuri fight. We'll see what that meant in just a second. But the dust settles as Luffy seems to be taken out. his eyes blank, but then Katakuri falls down as well. Both of them exhausted, finished, seemingly, after this fight. And Luffy realizes the time. He realizes that he has just a few minutes to meet at Cacao Island, because they've been fighting for 10 hours. And he looks up and he sees Katakuri, after having fallen, towering over him. And he asks Luffy, will you be back someday to topple Big Mom? And Luffy says, of course I will. I'll be the man who will be king of the pirates. And Katakuri says, you're looking quite far into the future. Before he falls on his back. An acknowledgement of Luffy's victory, and an acknowledgement of the fact that he is not perfect, he's not an ideal. This is who he is. Someone who, at times, stumbles, is vulnerable, shows weakness, fails, is super strong, super admirable, but not inhuman. And he falls to the ground defeated, as Luffy, who is fully conscious and having to move on, looks at him and takes this hat that he had and covers his mouth, out of respect. This isn't a symbol of continue to hide yourself, but it is an acknowledgement of Luffy not really knowing, was this for me alone? Who do you want to show yourself to? Luffy, as always, has never pushed people to do anything. He's simply shown them his side of things, and they do with what they will. So, he maintains Katakuri's dignity by putting this hat on him. And what Katakuri will do from that point on, that's his decision. But Luffy doesn't want him to be mocked and derided if he doesn't want to be. I think it's a beautiful sort of encapsulation of maintaining his dignity and respect, but also going, you decide. And Peckham shows himself with Brûlé, who he's captured, and says that he wants to carry out his last promise to Pedro to help Luffy reunite with the rest of the Straw Hats. As everyone waits for him, friends and enemies alike. But just a couple things about that end to the Katakuri fight. Some people asked me, what are my thoughts on what he says about, do you plan to come back to take out Big Mom? And Luffy says, of course. He says, you're looking quite far into the future. Katakuri is a subtle character, a very interpretive character. There are lots of ways to theorize about him. I don't think it's explicit that he wants Luffy to defeat Big Mom. I don't. However, through the things he's learned through his fight with Luffy, he's learned a bunch of things about self-acceptance, which obviously colors his perception of Big Mom in a different way because she's what forced him to be that way, essentially. She's the core, she's the root. I think that he's just invested in Luffy's journey and is a kindred spirit and maybe wants to dance with him again. But Luffy says that he's going to topple her and become king of the pirates, and he says that Luffy's looking forward to the future. So he says in the future that will happen. So that ensures that he believes that Luffy will defeat Big Mom. Now, does he want him to? I don't know. I just think he's invested and believes that it'll happen. But in this moment, he finally falls on his back, finally is defeated, and it's beautiful. Really, Pudding and Katakuri truly are these hurt children who are forced to be perfect, but you can never maintain that forever. And so, embracing yourself is always the way to go. And again, like I said, I hope they find each other. Katakuri had to say goodbye to Luffy, who changed things for him, and Pudding had to say goodbye to Sanji. Both of Luffy and Sanji being these turning points through their beauty, their internal beauty is wonderful. But the consistency of this theming here is just beyond words. Now, Luffy and Peckham's escape as Peckham's goes into Sulong form, but he can't really control it. Sanji goes to help Luffy, it's mayhem. Then Germa comes and heads off the opponents and allows for Luffy and Sanji to escape. It's absolute mayhem. Luffy and Sanji fighting through all of this, it's great stuff. As Germa say, we were just hoping to enact some payback of our own. The news makes it to the rest of the forces from Brûlé throughout all this chaos that Katakuri was defeated, and everyone is in disbelief. They think that Luffy must have used some sorcery, and they all try to pursue them even further, even harder, as Luffy is passed out and Sanji is sort of cradling him as they make their escape. Germa fends them off. Jinbei and the Straw Hats are getting ready to coalesce and then escape. Reiju, great moment as she defends Sanji and Luffy, saying, "Get away from my little brother." And Sanji sees the Sunny carrying Luffy. Finally, they're so close to making it out of here. They make it onto the Straw Hat. Everyone's happy to see them finally after so long. The promise is made, is fulfilled. Then they get surrounded by Big Mom's forces, but Germa again heads them off. The Sun Pirates, Jinbei's connection, coming back to reward him, fights them off as well. Big Mom gets ready to eat the cake, or the cake gets ready to be eaten by Big Mom. And just, I love the Sun Pirates saying, "We came to see you off, Captain Jinbei. We can still be your subordinates till you leave our territory, can't we?" Beautiful stuff. There's been an ever-present element throughout the story of Jinbei's connections coming back to reward him, the connections he makes throughout his life, because he's made so many. Now, Big Mom eats the cake, and her rampage finally comes to an end as everyone kind of rejoices. And there is a beautiful amount of emotion on her face as she tearfully eats it. You know, you can't help but feel for her, knowing what this means, what this food means, what this cake means, as she's being transported to that time that's so traumatic to her. And for a moment, she can just feel that happiness without having to repress it again. And people are rejoicing. They say thanks to Pudding, attributing all the accolades to her, but she thinks to herself, it wasn't me. It was her. It was just her and someone else. Multiple people, but I'm specifically thinking of one. Now, in this seemingly endless pursuit, the Straw Hats and the Sunny continue to be chased by Oven, by the Big Mom pirates, as she sees them and sings this song, and her boat pursues them. And through this cannon fire that's shot at the Sunny, it seems like things have gone badly wrong, as we see a huge explosion and the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hats just in the water. But things are not quite how they seem there. And so we see that Wadatsumi, boy buddy, was able to pull them underneath and sort of sacrifice himself so that Jinbei and the Straw Hats can get away in this really beautiful scene for a very minor character. And so we get this really quick flashback as we see that all of the Sun Pirates are committed to letting Jinbei escape come what may, no matter what. Life or death, they're gonna do this. As they say, keep going, Jinbei, Straw Hats, keep going. And Jinbei, in seeing this, tells Luffy that he cannot abandon them. He says he wants to stay back and fight with them so they can stop the pursuit, and that he'll meet up with them later. He says, let me hold the line. And he says, I will fulfill this duty and return alive. And that is a promise. Just as Luffy promises throughout the series, he's always fulfilled them. That is Jinbei's promise to Luffy. And Luffy says, after this long, hard look, Luffy looks at him, Jinbei looks back, and Luffy says, your captain is me now. We are not stopping this ship. We'll be waiting in Wano, so you'd better show up. This is a promise. And Jinbei smiles and says, I'm in your debt. And Luffy says, don't even let death stop you. Magnificent moment. And there's no way he won't make it to Wano. After a promise like this, no chance. And the Sunny makes its getaway as Jinbei and everyone else holds them off. And what I love about this is that we have Big News Morgan saying to Stussy, in the near future, one of the worst generation is going to rise to claim the mantle of the Pirate King. And in this moment, you really get the idea, the role of Morgan's really dawns on you as he seems to graduate from propagandist, reporter, to a storyteller. And I even had the fleeting thought, is One Piece a story told by Morgans? You know, in the past I've talked about Usopp telling the tale of the legend of Luffy, and that's One Piece. Maybe it could be Morgans too. There's a couple characters the narrator could be. Regardless, just a small thought. Morgan's fantastic character. Like I said, I'll talk more about him in the next video, but man, this spread at the end of 901, phenomenal. Really keys you into his role and makes you feel that he is quite essential to this story. I was just giving you the middle finger. I'm really sorry about that. I didn't even realize that. But yeah, Big News Morgans, who previously had publications that would, do propaganda for the world government against the Straw Hats seemingly, now seems to be an advocate of stories of Luffy being this legend to be the Pirate King. Big News Morgans is in a lot of ways a reflection of the audience, kind of in a way that Bart was, but rather he just seems to live for the spectacle, for the story, for the narrative, and he loves it. It thrills him, just like it thrills me. But we finally made our way to the last chapter here of Whole Cake Island, and we see the promise, or the last memory that we had of Pudding. A memory she stole from Sanji. She kisses him, and she removes that memory and keeps it just for her, allowing Sanji to be free and keeping this close to her heart. The person who changed her life, probably the most important person in her life. Very sad ending to Pudding's character arc, but there is hope, as she has kindred spirits in her family. Because as we see the last flashback, the last exclamation point, but a very understated one, for Katakuri. Brûlé cares for him, and we see that their relationship is more powerful than we even thought in the first place, more heartfelt, more special. As Katakuri says to her, it was nothing but a lie that I never put my back on the ground. And Brûlé says, I know. I know. You played the part of the perfect, unassailable man for our sake, didn't you? You could make friends if you covered your mouth. And as we see a flashback to his childhood where he never really cared about covering his mouth. He didn't really care. He was just fully himself. But then he sees that Brûlé had this horrible injury, this slash across her face, because someone that Katakuri beat up, a group of kids that Katakuri beat up because they were making fun of him, took their revenge on her. And so this was when he realized that his actions could have consequences on his loved ones, and so he hid himself for the sake of protecting those he loved, specifically Brûlé. And Brûlé, as a kid, even all the way back then, says, don't worry, it doesn't hurt, and if you ask me, you're fine the way you are. She told this to him, but nonetheless, he covered himself up, he hid himself, for her sake. And she appreciated that. But he lived the rest of his life covered up, taking revenge and protecting his sister, as he thought to himself, I'll show no weakness, I'll make them fear my perfection, and that's why he did this. But he realizes now that that was a lie, that was not him, and that Brûlé loves him for who he is. And so I really hope Pudding can find solace in these two, because I really think they'd understand her, and they'd support her. And we end with Big Mom singing Soul Pocus, seeing the Germa fleet and crew fighting with the Sun Pirates fighting, and her seeming to look at this with this hunger in her eyes as she wants to tear these forces apart. Very ominous ending there. We see Jinbei, we see his crew, the Sun Pirates, we see Germa, and she says life or death as she seems ready to tear them apart. Jinbei is going to be fine, but we don't know the nuances of what happens here, and it ends, like I said, on a very dark, ominous note. But with the last acts of Whole Cake Island, the crew are finally able to eat again. They are dying of hunger for what Sanji has to cook up for them. Beautifully, we see as he's cooking this up for them, we also see it reflected as we get a glimpse of the Baratie on the East Blue, as Zeph and Sanji at the same time, father and son, cook up this food. Sanji for his crew, Zeph for it seems like customers, but nonetheless, it's the universal language food. Connections, love, the joining of people. That's what Sanji always knew, but that's what Zeph emphasized even more as he allowed him to set free. And Zeph is now okay. He didn't even know he was in danger, I don't think, because of how Sanji protected him. Beautiful stuff, and a beautiful way to end this arc, with this coming together of family. Very sad for Pudding, but I do think there's hope for her. And Katakuri and Brûlé embracing one another, having one another, despite being these broken people. Sanji back with his family. Sanji's father, Zeph, being okay, healthy and happy. Lovely stuff. And that's the arc, guys. That's the arc. Wow. There's just so much to talk about, so much that's done so well. Brilliance from Katakuri, Sanji, Pudding, Brûlé, Luffy, Big Mom. So much to do with those two themes that I mentioned, and it explores them so deeply. The theme of this duality, and the theme of the nuances of family, and the way that Germa is executed, and the way that Judge came around, and they sort of, it would take a lifetime to make up for what they did, but they can only do what they can do in the present, and they fought to free the Straw Hats and let Sanji go free, and that counts for something. Judge is still a horrible person, but it is worth noting. Fantastic arc. As a whole, Whole Cake Island just does so much and does it so beautifully. So my top 5 arcs would be, I guess, Marineford, Water 7 Enies Lobby, Skypiea, because that ending just still sticks with me, Whole Cake Island, and Dressrosa. But it's a pretty damn fluid list. 3 to 5, even 2 to 5 are so fluid. That order could be anything and I'd be happy with it, with Marineford as number 1. Anyways, this arc was easy 9, closer to a 10 than a 9. I loved it. I'll always remember it. It is a fantastic shonen arc, and it still boggles my mind to this day that people think One Piece falls off after the time skip. Like, what? There have been 3 fantastic arcs and 1 good arc, and I really just can't bring myself to understand how people think the quality goes down. It doesn't. It has been going from strength to strength. It's incredible. And so we get now to my favorite characters list, of which there is now 30. I promise it won't go higher than 30. It won't go, no, not a chance. but we have 30. The honorable mentions first are as follows. Big Mom, Smoker, Sengoku, Shirahoshi, Aokiji, Cricket, Kalgara, Heberlook, Sir Crocodile, Frankie, Zeph, Brule, Pudding, and the Going Merry. And the top 30 is number 30, Pedro. Love Pedro. I think he will continue to grow in my mind as a fantastic character. Number 29, Smoker. 28, Chopper. 27, Roger. 26, Sabo. 25, Fisher Tiger. 24, Blackbeard. And making it in at number 23 is Carrot. Love Carrot. Number 22, Wiper. Number 21, Kairos. Number 20, Brook. Number 19, Fujitora. 18, Noland. 17, Buggy. 16, Jimbei. 15, Corazon. 14, Vivi. 13, Ace. 12, Garp. 11, Law, who has gone down a little bit. I do think that I was jumping the gun, putting him top 5 a little bit after Dressrosa. A little bit of recency bias on my part, but still, fantastic character. He's number 11. Zoro, number 10. Sanji, wow, from honorable mention to number 9, Sanji. Number 8, Shanks. Number 7, Nami. Number 6, Robin. And the highest entry as a change from this video, number 5, Katakuri. Wholeheartedly, Katakuri is top 5 in the series for me at this point. He's fantastic for all the reasons I stated previously. I love him. I love him. He's absolutely... I do a top 100 antagonist stream every year, and he's undoubtedly going to be on it. Number 4, Usopp. Number 3, Whitebeard. Number 2, Doflamingo. And number 1, Luffy. Reclaiming the mantle. That's my top 30, guys. Let me know your thoughts. I hope that these rankings continue to be interesting as they continue to grow, but I promise it's not getting higher than 30. That's too much. And Whole Cake Island, man, what a journey. Next, we have the Reverie before getting into Wano. Next video will be an hour-and-a-half video on the Reverie, where there are revelations after revelations, recontextualizations, the introduction of so many interesting elements. Emu. Seeing a lot of my favorite characters again. Just, the Reverie was amazing, so if you want to see that video right now, you can get that through early access on Patreon. You can watch it right now if you want to. You can also join the Discord to join the community, talk about One Piece, talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can also follow my Twitch if you want to see me read through every single chapter of One Piece. We're in Wano now. We are in Wano. It is happening, so now's the time to join in if you really want to. Or you could catch my Naruto streams. I'm going through Naruto. We're now getting towards the last third or so of Naruto, so that's really exciting. We'll be doing Bleach in the future as well. I'm currently playing through the Metal Gear Solid series, so that's lots of fun. We're doing blind playthroughs of that. Yeah, it's a great time on Twitch. We've got lots of variety, lots of peak fiction. Follow me if you haven't already and you're interested. Please feel free to share your thoughts on this one. I'm really interested to see lots of takes on this because there's so much here. It's such a rich arc. Please share your thoughts. And if you want to potentially be entered into a future video, your comments to be read aloud, you just use the hashtag AJPiece. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me for a gigantic video. I don't know how long this is going to be, but it's a gigantic one. And I'll see you guys next time. Many thanks for watching.